Good morning, all. Please sit down so that we can start. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third day of our 66 GEF consult meeting. I hope that you had a nice rest last night. Today, I'm really happy and honored at the same time to have with us, our co-chair, Mr. Badji Dauda. Badji represents the Burkina Faso, Cabo Verde, Chad, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Senegal, and Gambia, being a Gambian national. So thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're very happy that you were able to sort out your difficulties in traveling over here. And I want to formally welcome you to our council meeting. Having said that, we have a very healthy, diverse agenda for today. And I would like to pass it over to my co-chair so he can introduce our first agenda item of today. Mr. Co-chair, you got the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. It was a pleasure to be here with you. I'm sorry I was unable to come here since the first day, but we can live continue. So thank you very much, Chair. And today we are starting on agenda item 13, which is the report from the chairperson of staff. So it's a pleasure to call on the presenter to present before the council on agenda item 13. So the floor is yours, yeah.
Thank you, co-chair. Good morning, GEF family. As usual, I begin my presentation with a wonder of nature. And today we have a mud skipper fish fighting off the approaching claws of a crab. And I think this amazing mud skipper could be a good mascot for the GEF. It's a fish that swims, but it can also walk, jump, breathe out of the water, and it has two eyes that can move independently so they can view the past and the future. And the GEF is seeking to be nimble to achieve transformation as we face the closely approaching claws of climate change, biodiversity, pollution, and inequity. So maybe we need GEF t-shirts with mud skippers. Okay, let's go forward and show you. This is the staff, and I hope you've had a chance to talk to my colleagues these last few days, including our newest member, the IW panel member, Suzanne Schmeier, who is over here, and she is attending her first council meeting. She's the head of water governance. She is the head of the Water Governance Department at the Institute for Water Education in Delft, the Netherlands. And so her expertise includes legal and institutional mechanisms for mitigating conflict around natural resources. And she continues STAP's expansion, if you will, of our collective wisdom to include more social science, economics, behavioral science, and governance expertise as the council has recommended. But at this council meeting, we are also sadly saying goodbye to Dr. Ed Carr, our panel member on adaptation, and Dr. Graciela Metternich, our panel member on land degradation. And we will miss them both very much, but our staff alum remain family. So we will keep them as part of our brain trust. And we're all here till the end of the week. So we hope you'll have a chance to talk with all of us. With the departure of Dr. Carr and Dr. Metternich, that means that soon UNEP will send our newly selected candidates to the council for approval. So watch for that on climate adaptation and land degradation. And also in new events, for the first time, my right hand, Dr. Sunday Leonard, who is from Nigeria, is the official staff secretary appointed after the assembly, has a long experience in science policy, an engineering degree, an agriculture degree, has worked on climate change science, mitigation, chemicals and waste. So a wonderful choice. So very happy to have him at my side. So first I will present some new science, then I'll say some words about STAP Science Day at the Assembly, which most of you are at, present our many recent reports and work, our future work, and end with our observations on this GEF work program. So to separate for new science, I'm showing you a horseshoe crab, and these are significant for several reasons. They have helped with old science and new science. They've been around longer than the dinosaurs, 430 million years. They are resilient, and they continue to contribute to our understanding of coastal health. But also they have blue blood. They contribute to new science too, this copper-based blood, and it's used to detect bacterial contamination in vaccines, including our COVID vaccines recently. All right, so I thought it was appropriate to show a picture, if you can see it, of Earth taken nearly 34 years ago this month, just before GEF came into being. And it's commonly called the pale blue dot. It was taken by Voyager 1, and it shows the Earth from 6 billion kilometers away. And the astronauts wanted us to see this and said, you can see Earth's vulnerability and that our home is just a tiny fragile speck in the cosmos. And I think this vulnerability is felt even more today, as the GEF family knows, making our mission even more critical. And as the CEO said on Monday, the world economic community knows it too. The just released 2024 World Economic Report again lists 4 of the 5 global risks over the next decade as environmental, or green, as you see. And this year, the 4 are, and that's the bottom line, the previous years are above it. They are extreme weather events, critical changes to the Earth's systems, biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse, and natural resource shortages. And just in green on the right there, I put that pollution popped in at number 10. So as if this isn't enough to worry about, they argue that cooperation on urgent global issues could be in increasingly short supply, and that massive misinformation is eroding public understanding of the importance of tackling environmental problems both quickly and systemically. 2 recent assessments of the Earth system's tipping points, which I've talked about in previous councils, show that we are on a trajectory posing grave threats to humanity. And I think you remember a tipping point occurs when a small change actually sparks an often rapid and irreversible transformation. So the assessment identified key tipping points related to climate change and impacted by it: the melting of both Greenland and the West Antarctic ice sheet, the massive die-offs of warm water coral, the overturning of the North Atlantic circulation, intensification of El Nino, and widespread thawing of the permafrost. And they highlight the interactions between these various tipping points. And most of those interactions are further destabilizing. So for example, the intensification of the El Nino with warmed ocean waters could accelerate the die-off of warm water corals and interact in that way. So that means that our inaction could lead to a chain reaction of changes, or kind of a domino effect of acceleration. And with the increasing likelihood of breaching the 1.5 degree target, climate target, the tipping point noted that there is the potential for catastrophic effects, including the loss of capacity to grow some of the major staple crops globally. But the report also presents some hope, and it identifies in that upward line some positive tipping points already in progress that humanity can accelerate to reduce the negatives. And these include actions by innovators, governments, investors, and companies to propel the exponential uptake of energy worldwide, the increasing globalized efforts to reduce emissions and restore and conserve nature, the increasing rapid growth in electric vehicles, and increasing shift to move to plant-based diets. And these innovations, along with needed policy coherence, incentives, and the whole of society approach, as we've talked about, can lead to these positive transformation tipping points. So to avoid the negative tipping points, the report made recommendations that are clearly relevant to the work of the GEF, including increasing efforts to phase out fossil fuels and land use emissions well before 2050, strengthening adaptation and loss and damage governance, and coordinating policy efforts to trigger positive tipping points. Let's look at climate change in 2023. On the left, you see month by month the temperatures, and on the right, I'm going to show you change over years. But I'm sure that it's no longer news to you that 2023 was the warmest year on record, driven in part by El Nino, but the bulk of that temperature increase by climate change. And it was between 1.3 and 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures, according to the UN World Meteorological Office and their State of the Global Climate 23 report. In fact, the European Union Copernicus Climate Change Service put the global mean temperature for 2023 as the highest on record and at 1.48 degrees above pre-industrial average, just a whisker away from 1.5 degrees, the Paris Agreement proposed target. And as you can see from the month by month on the left, the concern is not only that that red line was broken last year, but by the amount it was broken by, especially through that remarkable streak of the last 6 months. Now, this does not mean that we have breached the limits set by the Paris Agreement, but it does set a dire precedent. And that spiral on the right was filling up with the temperatures over many years. And I thought I would share that to you. It's a visualization since 1880 by NASA. And you can see how climate change in recent years has really moved past the 1 degree C. The WMO State of the Global Climate Report also talked about how justice and climate impacts are interrelating. And as this map shows, climate-related disasters are disproportionately affecting and are more severe in the less wealthy countries and for the people who have contributed the least to the problem. People in the darker red colors are more impacted due to more exposure and sensitivity and their inability to adapt. And that graph on the right is showing you that undernourishment is increasing. So you could see it was falling from about 205 on, but now it is increasing again, in part because of climate change. And so it is pushing humanity far off track to achieve the zero hunger target goal of the SDGs. More news on climate. It is exacerbating both drought on the left and flood on the right. The climate crisis is really, if you will, supercharging extreme weather. And in the last few months, there have been many articles that have been discussing high temperatures, wildfires, and droughts in the Amazon. We know about the fires in Chile this week. And this paper, published just 2 weeks ago by a group of scientists, researchers at the World Weather Attribution Team, concluded that it was climate, not El Nino, that was the main driver of that Amazon drought of 2023. And you could see in those darkest red, or really brown colors, that the drought reached a level on their scale beyond extreme, which is the highest level. They found that global warming made the drought about 30 times more likely. And now this kind of drought could be expected every 13 years if we hit a 2°C world. Communities reliant on waterways were the ones that were most impacted by the drought, and the history of deforestation worsened the drought by reducing, of course, the capacity of the land to retain water. And if you move to the right panel, after years of drought, anyway, the short rainy season that was experienced in the Horn of Africa, which starts in October and ends in December, brought unbelievably heavy, exceptionally heavy rains, leading to severe flooding in Ethiopia, in Kenya, and in Somalia. And again, the attribution analysis concluded that climate change altered the likelihood and intensity, and weather stations reported between 200 and 500 millimeters more rain than usual this year, even a month before the end of the raining season. And so they concluded that human-induced climate change increased the intensity of rainfall 2 times. Let's turn to another news story just 48 hours ago. Oops, maybe not. A new paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences proposed that we need to add a new higher level of 6 to hurricanes or typhoons. Right now, level 5 is the highest, but that starts at 70 meters per second or 157 miles per hour, but it doesn't stop. There's no upper limit. And that can lead to an underestimation of risk if everything above that is 5. And so these scientists propose we need a category 6 because climate change is supercharging hurricanes and typhoons. And so they said it should start at 192 miles per hour, which is 85 meters per second. And we've actually already had at least 5 of these in the last 12 years, including Super Typhoon Haiyan, which devastated the Philippines, Hurricane Patricia in the East Pacific, and Super Typhoon Meranti, or called Ferdy sometimes, also in the Philippines. In terms of ice, it doesn't want to move. All right, I have to click this though. All right, we'll see if my action will work here. Continuing the sobering news about Antarctica and Greenland, here are 2 videos going simultaneously from Antarctica on the left and Greenland on the right over the changes in the last 2 decades. And you can see as things are getting redder, the continent of Antarctica shed an average of 150 billion tons of ice per year, which adds to sea level rise. And these images are created from satellite data, and the orange and red areas show what's losing ice mass, and there's a few areas in blue that are actually gaining. But the warming waters around Antarctica are also contributing to this. And on the right, you've seen what's happened to Greenland, also rapidly declined, surface melting, iceberg calving, and Greenland is losing 270 billion tons of ice per year. And again, adding to sea level rise. Just a little more on problems. The latest IPBES report provides us with a really interesting, if again, somewhat depressing, overview of the impact that invasive alien species have on nature and people over the last few decades. So you see alien species on the left, and I think you'll recognize at least one that you know from your country. And they've been introduced to new regions. There's probably 37,000 alien species. The invasive ones are a subset that are known to have established and spread. And so of that subset, about 3,500, 2/3 have been found on lands managed, owned, or used by indigenous people. And as you can see, 60% of recorded global extinctions appear to be the result of invasive alien species. The cost of these is extraordinary. You see 423 billion, and it appears that that cost has quadrupled every decade since the 1970s. And so these invasive species, alien and invasive species, can have a negative effect, obviously, on the quality of life, reducing food supply, but also can be involved in disease transmission and ripping apart, in a way, ecosystems. And I'll give you an example of that soon. Preventiveness and preparedness are really the best and most cost-effective way to deal with invasive alien species. So to give you an example of how tiny things can make a mighty difference, this is a paper on an ecological chain reaction set off by big-headed ants. It was just published in Science, and they found that the spread of these big-headed ants, which are actually quite small, in Kenya, set off a situation that resulted in hungry lions getting fewer zebras. So in the normal functioning ecosystem, which is the panel on the left, there are acacia ants, not the big-headed ants, that protect the acacia trees so that when the elephants try to eat them, they sting them inside their trunks so the elephants don't eat them. And the ants get nectar and shelter from the tree. So it's a nice mutualism. But when this big-headed ant arrived, it eats all the acacia ants, and then the elephants don't get stung by the big-headed ants. So the elephants are free to eat the trees and rampage the acacia trees and knock the trees down and deforest the place. But lions need to hide to be able to catch the zebras, and they have a harder time finding them. And so the lions were 3 times more successful in the forested areas than where the big-headed ants occur. So the hefty carnivores are now under threat from an unlikely and petite new nemesis, an invasive ant small enough to fit inside a sesame seed. And yet, the fact that the lions are now struggling to hunt their favorite prey is entirely attributable to those ants, a tiny invader reconfiguring predator-prey dynamics in a whole ecosystem. So we've often talked about cascading events, but I thought this story of the ant taking down the lion was an interesting one that you might want to share at home with your children as well. But let me now talk about some new technology, some exciting news in the world of technology. In artificial intelligence, now we all know that AI was significantly in the news in 2023, from ChatGPT to Google Bard to Microsoft Copilot. There is growing interest in AI for its utility, as well as a professor, I must say, deep concerns about its possible downsides. But this recent study shows how AI can be really beneficial for environmental sustainability. So the authors combined bioacoustics, which studies animal sounds, artificial intelligence, and light traps to understand the composition of birds, amphibians, mammals, and insects in an area of reforested tropical Chaco in northwestern Ecuador. And so many species across all kinds of taxonomic groups use sound to communicate. So if you can record that and analyze it in computer models, you can understand what species are there and estimate their abundance. So the results show that these technologies are a great tool for tracking biodiversity recovery, even in very complex, diverse ecosystems like tropical forests, where getting accurate results is really very difficult and time-consuming. And this study confirmed good news, that reforestation interventions do work and do lead to biodiversity recovery as the species of birds, of amphibians and mammals and insects indeed return to these regenerating forests within 25 years. Yet it's a very big positive progress. But as we've all discussed in earlier meetings this week, it's important to think about the amount of time that you might need to see some of these things. But I think this is a wonderful new potential technology that will help us in the future. So now let me turn to the GEF Assembly reports and recent work. The antelope here are from Masai Mara, is that right? No, Masai Mara. And these are topies that can run up to 40 miles per hour and outpace cheetahs. So I thought that maybe STAP tries to emulate this, and we're all looking at the horizon scanning, which is part of our job, of course. Many of you were at STAP Science Day, and I'll just say a few words about that because we did post a report on that. on on the website. So we had the pleasure of hearing from the GEF CEO to open the day, who reminded us that we will not be successful continuing to do the same things and just bringing more money onto the table. That was followed by Dr. Rashid Samaya from the University of British Columbia, who framed our approach to ocean use as currently, not GEF, but others, take everything everywhere all at once. And that instead, that must move to not everything, not everywhere, not all at once. And then we had 2 sessions, one on youth leaders learning, where they shared their experiences, and to us elders, one of the youth implored us to, quote, listen to youth to understand, not necessarily to always respond. So I think it's important, as we've been discussing earlier this week, that we listen to the next generation. The afternoon focused on Indigenous and local knowledge and how such knowledge can help the GEF deliver greater global environmental benefits. We had sessions on the Arctic and North and on the Amazon, and had the plenary speaker Eduardo Brandizio, who just won the prestigious Volvo Prize for his work on Indigenous cultures and biodiversity in the Amazon. And just a couple of quick takeaways. Integration across peoples, cultures, topics, geographies, ways of learning, and governance structure was deemed essential by the group to address today's sustainability challenge. There was a call, which we have reinforced here, of course, in the GEF family, for doing business that involves a whole of government and a whole of society approach. And beyond delivering global environmental benefits, we do need to increasingly think, as we've also talked about this week, co-benefits that will be important to local people and culture, including health and livelihoods. It was also said many times that Indigenous peoples, local communities, women must have access to direct funding and financial and management capacity to be able to compete for finance. And then there were a lot of comments about make sure you have the staying power. The engagement with youth and Indigenous people and local communities can never be one-off. It cannot be tokenism. We need a community and a meeting of minds that continue to share information, collaborate, and work to address our sustainability challenges over the years. And then a final thought from one of the participants was, pursuing sustainability is not good enough. You don't just want to maintain, you want to elevate or enhance, not just sustain. Many of you in the margins of this council have asked me why the papers that staff contributed. So let me just take a minute to talk about it. We really aim to address ongoing topics pertinent to the GEF work to deliver global environmental benefits, of course, as well as socioeconomic benefits in our quest for transformational change. And so in my closing remarks at the Assembly, I talked about emerging technology, social and economic signals, and these trends. And one of the things that I mentioned on the technology side was agrovoltaics, which integrates clean energy with food production. And so we decided to explore that more. And I think it aligns with one of STAP's core mandates of bringing to you emerging solutions. On the economic side, it's very clear that blended finance can be an innovative and effective tool for mobilizing private investment, in which the GEF intends to invest 195 million in GEF 8. And we know there's going to be a need for even more increased private investments in biodiversity and nature-based solutions to achieve the goals of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So we prepared an information note on what we found in the literature on blended finance and about some ideas for GEF. On alternative livelihoods, in the past, STAP has produced papers addressing multi-stakeholder dialogue and behavioral change. And 2 topics that are related to those are alternative livelihood interventions and citizen science, as both can help engage more stakeholders and facilitate behavioral change. So I think these will help the GEF partnerships. And indeed, the IEO's wonderful video, I think they're always trying to upstage the scientists in their Sugi Mukti. That was a wonderful example of both citizen science and alternative livelihoods. And these are very closely related, of course, to the community-based approaches as we move to a whole of society. Our paper on environmental security follows up on 2 previous STAP efforts. And as discussed yesterday, the GEF gap analysis showed that GEF agencies have different policies and frameworks for projects in fragile and conflict situations. And the IEO analysis of drylands and learning from challenges, both of those also showed the growing importance of conflicts and fragility to protect success. So our paper provides some guidance on designing projects that consider these concerns and help move us towards durability. And lastly, the paper on ecosystem-based approaches was prepared to respond to the IEO's homework assignment to us at the last council meeting in Brasilia that asked staff to provide technical advice on definitions and guidelines for implementing ecosystem-based approaches. And I will also talk about our ongoing work on climate change adaptation co-benefits in the trust fund, which we decided to work on as it is relevant to GEF's ongoing work tracking and measuring the socioeconomic co-benefits of GEF investments, which was discussed yesterday. So just wanted to say we don't pluck these out of the air. We try to build on GEF's needs, your issues, and what's emerging from the broader scientific and technical community. So to do a little more on each of these, here's agrovoltaics. And as you can see, it involves using the same land for solar photovoltaic power production and ag activities such as crop production, livestock grazing, aquaculture, and ecosystem protection. And a major benefit is that it can address the issue of land competition between food production and renewable energy. And the scientific literature suggests there can be other clear benefits, including, of course, renewable energy production, which reduces greenhouse gas emissions, enhanced food production, water efficiency, and potentially help with conservation and even resilience to climate change. Agrivoltaics can also increase income and address several of the sustainable development goals, such as poverty alleviation, food, water, energy security. It actually has seen a significant growth with the energy going from what was 5 megawatts in 2012 to 14 gigawatts in 2021. And since the California power outages are much on our mind, that's the equivalent of having powered 1,200 homes back in 2012 and now powering 3.5 million homes for a year. And so it's significant growth. And the countries that are leading there, you see on the list: China, Japan, Germany, Italy, France, South Korea, and a growing interest in the United States and India. Our report mapped, there we go. Our report mapped the benefits of agrovoltaics against the GEF objectives across the fund it supports. And you can see that. And we found that it can contribute to achieving some of the core indicators of GEF 8. And we also suggest, though, that it's going to have to be implemented using a circular economy approach because of the possible chemical pollution from PV panel disposals, for example. So think about that well. But there are also issues. There are technical issues and trade-offs that need to be considered. So you might need to prioritize if it's either ag production or energy, because some crops do quite well in these systems, like grapes, vegetables, root crops, and nut-producing trees and shrubs, but others require high sunlight, like wheat, corn, and rice. And there's also barriers, of course, to implementing these systems, especially in the global South. So the initial cost could be somewhere between 4% up to 100% higher than a conventional ground-based PV system. But other very important barriers include lack of supportive policies, inadequate technical capacity, and economic and really sociocultural issues, such as the dominance of smallholder ag in the global South. And there could be really clear societal apprehension due to inadequate awareness and concerns about compatibility with current practices. So we think the GEF could help support countries in understanding the appropriateness of agrivoltaics for their specific context, help them put in place the needed enablers for adoption and scaling, invest in demonstration projects, and help facilitate partnerships to promote technology assistance. Let me move to blended finance. I've already mentioned that we all know the need exceeds the available public funding, and this places increased expectations on the GEF to attract private capital, a pattern that will only continue with the GBFF. So STAP is keen to support GEF's innovative work with the private sector to attract sustainable finance by helping de-risk investments that are critical for scaling transformative GEBs. And the GEF has a long history in finance, investing in the 1990s already in climate finance to support renewable energy projects. And more recently, we know the GEF is supporting blended finance in newer areas that invest in nature more directly, biodiversity conservation, land management, and in reducing chemicals and waste pollution. So our observation of blended finance projects in the GEF portfolio, complemented by reviews of the available academic and practitioner literature, made clear that the pathways to impact in blended finance projects are generally more complex than in conventional trust fund projects, and that entities outside the GEF partnerships then have, in a way, greater responsibility for their execution. So our look at the literature also showed that blended finance for the nature positive outcomes remains much less developed. And that's really understandable, since climate finance is what got a start much earlier in the 1990s. So blended finance enables the GEF to scale up its impact through the distributed actions of other entities, but it also highlights the risk to be sure we have a clear articulation of a project's logic in getting to environmental impact, and, as we've discussed this week, fast learning to ensure that the intended global environmental benefits are achieved in this area of very rapid innovation. So in our note, we propose 4 issues to frame an agenda for further inquiry, and we're hoping that some of the initial progress on this might emerge next week already, when there's a GEF workshop on blended finance Monday and Tuesday, after we all recover over the weekend. So first, improve guidance regarding what types of interventions, global environmental benefit interventions, in which contexts are best served by particular blended finance instruments. For example, projects on renewables are often more mature, with outcomes like greenhouse gas emission reductions, and those are more easily measurable than projects that are trying to aggregate diverse land management activities. So the former, the mitigation ones, are more amenable to risk mitigation instruments like guarantees, whereas the latter may need performance-based grants or concessional capital. Second, improving advice about the detailed design of a selected blended finance instrument to ensure that it fits the intended GEB interventions in their context. So, for example, even after you decide, say, on a debt instrument, there are so many details about how is its expected rate of return and its governance designed to suit the rate at which you can get those environmental benefits, which, as I discussed earlier, can sometimes be quite long, and what form of aligned technical assistance will encourage the achievement of those. And the last 2, develop advice on theories of change that identify the underlying assumptions to be measured and tested. We need an evidence base to expand. And finally, expand the GEF blended finance guidelines to encourage this needed learning and use of existing lessons related to those previous 3 issues. So in collaboration with the GEF partnership, we aim to report more on this in future meetings. We did a paper, as I said, on alternative livelihoods because we found that many GEF projects mention alternative livelihoods as a way to lessen environmental harm in general, and sometimes arguing that those alternative livelihoods will be more resilient to climate change. So again, we reviewed the academic and practitioner literature, as well as various guidelines and frameworks. We looked at 47 full-size GEF 7 projects that had alternative livelihoods in the title or project materials that GEFSAC and the agencies identified for us. Interestingly, the scientific literature is slim. There is limited evidence for the effectiveness of alternative livelihood interventions to actually achieve measured environmental benefits. More specifically, questions remain about the permanence of the shifts in livelihoods among intended participants and community groups. And so, as we've heard loud and clear during this council meeting, encouraging people to change their livelihoods is a really complex endeavor and involves wanted behavioral change. So our report suggests that GEF projects considering alternative livelihood interventions carefully assess whether they are the most appropriate way to deliver the global environmental benefits. And in the theory of change that they will develop, have explicit pathways for achieving project outcomes, ensure local stakeholders understand and buy in, build long-term monitoring and evaluation so we increase this spotty evidence base, and provide long-term support. Again, this is not a short-term issue. And these suggestions really, I think, mirror STAP's advice on enabling elements of good project design. Moving to environmental security. The GEF, the IEO, and STAP have all been working on this issue, and many GEF agencies already have policies, guidance, tools, and best practices, but there isn't yet a single coherent set of guidelines to help develop projects in fragile areas and where there is or has been conflict, which, as we know, is a feature of many GEF projects. To assist with this, we held a joint workshop with GEFSAC after Brasilia in November and met with agencies, and we had the German and Swiss development agencies to discuss their approach to working in fragile and conflict-affected situations. And so this brief that we put out builds on insights from the workshop and provides some suggestions on how to design and implement projects in fragile and conflict-affected situation so that we can move towards durable GEBs. And we had 6 entry points. Obviously, we're going to tell you to use systems thinking, but particularly to untangle the complexity in fragile and conflict situations. And as you think about future narratives, you need to think about how fragile and conflict situations could unfold going forward. You need to think about co-benefits for stakeholders, including restoration of peace. And you need to identify links between conflict risk and the environmental outcomes you're seeking. As we've heard several times this week, allow for flexibility, allow for periodic review, allow for adaptive management, but have contingency plans that you've worked out, at least initially. And of course, as always, effective stakeholder engagement. So the paper also identifies opportunities at the systemic level to strengthen GEF's engagement and increase the likelihood that they will achieve enduring global environmental benefits. And it relates obviously to our discussion yesterday on risk appetite, on adaptive manage, and on implementing learning. So there's a lot of coherence across these. On citizen science, doesn't like me. There we go. As we heard frequently during the assembly in Vancouver, including from the CEO, global environmental challenges require this all of society approach, and that's governments, the private sector, academia, civil society, communities, citizens, they all have a role to play. And so citizen science, as I said earlier, is really related to the community-based approaches, but here it focuses on generating scientific knowledge. It's not everything you might do with a community, but it involves non-professionals in designing, implementing, monitoring, collecting data, analyzing data, and evaluating projects to improve science and knowledge. And it's not new, of course. Citizen science has been around for a long time, actually, I think since the 17th century, but it has been growing in numbers and in geographical diversity, especially in the last few years. And many of you have probably seen apps which are becoming more widespread and accessible. For example, iNaturalist allows any of us to upload a plant or animal anywhere in the world, and we can help map biodiversity, and we can get identification for that critter or plant in 56 languages. So I think citizen science has great potential to contribute to GEF's mission of achieving global environmental benefits through, for example, improved data collection, both quality and scope, capacity building, increased scientific awareness and knowledge, and it provides clear opportunities to include indigenous, traditional, and local knowledge. So our paper provides numerous examples of how citizen science is working in practice for monitoring species, for monitoring soil health, rainfall patterns, water quality. And it's also being used actually to monitor progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. We make a few suggestions. We think it would be good for GEF to include citizen science in the taxonomy of terms in the new knowledge management and learning strategy. We think a guide for project developers on how to use citizen science and provide training might be valuable. And we would like to encourage partnerships among citizen science initiatives, indigenous peoples, and local communities and research institutions to facilitate knowledge sharing. So we think this is an interesting new area. And now let me just say a few words about the paper. The note summarizing definitions and guidelines on ecosystem-based approaches. This is, as I said, what we wrote in response to the IEO's assignment in the strategic country cluster evaluation, Lower Mekong. So they wanted staff to provide advice on agreed upon definitions and guidelines on ecosystem-based approaches. So we do. This note summarizes definitions of ecosystem-based approaches, and we include definitions of sort of what I would say are synonyms: nature-based solutions, ecosystem-based management, integrated coastal management, integrated land use planning, and other terms. And then we include lists of guidelines that can support implementation of these terms, including, of course, staff's guidance on source to sea, and other reports by other technical organizations or groups of experts. And we also include several of staff's recent advisory documents. And finally, we present ways in which our advice from developing an appropriate theory of change can be applied to guide the selection of these terms and guidelines. So I hope this really will be what the IEO was thinking, kind of a one-stop shopping for ecosystem-based approaches. I promised to tell you a bit about climate adaptation. We've previously given you advice on how to design projects with more robust, shall we say, adaptation rationale and a typography of adaptation benefits. And we characterize those in three categories: reduced exposure or reduced sensitivity and improved adaptive capacity. So now we've looked at 34 GEF 8 projects. I know in my report it only said 24, but we continue to work. And we looked in the GEF Trust Fund, and we found that 40% of these projects are designed such that they actually are likely to deliver adaptation benefits. And the most likely benefit was reduced sensitivity, which is the red part of the bar, to climate impact. So an example of that is a project 11046, Armenia Integrated Resilience Improvement Project, which was a multifocal area. And that had a component to create climate resilience facilities, such as shelters and shades to help animals with increased temperatures. And as you know, we're setting records on temperatures all around the world. 20% of the projects were designed to deliver adaptive capacity, and that is to increase the ability of people to adapt, but only 6% of the projects were actually designed to reduce exposure to climate change. We did find, though, that really over half of the projects have the potential to deliver adaptation benefits with minor adjustments. So, for example, if the trust fund projects included data on climate change at the design phase, they could then connect their interventions to the climate adaptation benefits. So we'll continue to work on this and summarize it for the June Council, and I hope start a dialogue on how we can better capture adaptation benefits and foster more adaptation overall in the GEF Trust Fund portfolio. We were very busy, as you saw from my report, and in addition to working on all these papers, we participated in the Clean and Healthy Oceans IP Design Workshop. You heard yesterday about our deep involvement in the risk appetite. We sent Dr. Stafford Smith on the 2-week learning mission in Indonesia, which was to identify lessons from the Good Growth Partnership that can help with the implementation of the food systems, land use, and restoration impact program, as well as the design of the food systems integrated program. And finally, we gave briefings to at least, 3 briefings on the role of STAP in workshops in Cambodia, Solomon Islands, and Ethiopia at the Climate Adaptation Strategy workshops. I already mentioned that we had the Fragile and Conflict Affected Situations workshop in November with Jeff to share best practices. So we're trying to be not just, looking at the horizon and bringing science to you, but actually getting involved in helping you use that science. So what are we thinking about going forward? This is a hippo and her baby, and they spend their days underwater keeping cool, which increasingly they're having to do in our work. You cannot stump the CEO with any creatures. He knew the mud skipper the minute I put it up, from Australia, by the way. So let me talk just briefly about near term and long term, because council has asked to keep you informed. So we will continue to do further work on blended finance and on climate adaptation. As I said, we will work with the GEF SEC in implementing the knowledge management and learning strategy, next steps on risk appetite, policy coherence, and we will consider collectively best practices on community-based approaches for GEF 9 in response to the IEO's newest evaluation. Further down the road, as our CEO said on Monday, it's not too early to think about GEF 9, and we have begun thinking about it. What's on the horizon? What are some of the environmental implications, and how should GEF respond? We're thinking that we would like to have a science and technical convening to get ideas from a group of people, preferably before June. So it'd be the GEF family, the practitioner world, the science and technical world, to get some input on emerging new areas. In addition to what comes out of that already, we've talked about I talked at the end of the assembly about some of the signals and trends, the societal changes, the economic changes, and of course the science and technology changes. Some of those, some of the social changes are very important. The ones that I mentioned in the beginning, the erosion of social cohesion, polarization, environmental insecurity. But as we heard so wonderfully at the assembly, positive social changes, the increased levels of environmental activism, and the increased influence of youth and women. On economic and financial shifts, we're going to have to continue our quest to transform the current economic system, and these new financing modalities will evolve continually. And we're seeing all these new instruments, blended finance, debt for nature swaps, well, some are not so new, blue and green bonds. And on emerging technologies, I've already mentioned AI and machine learning and things that can make existing energy systems smart and more efficient, enable remote sensing and automatic monitoring of buildings as well as rainforests. So I think there's a lot to be looked at there. And of course, we hope there are incredible new generations of reliable batteries and improved electric vehicle driving range and lots of things in the energy and climate mitigation space. And environmental DNA, which can also be used for monitoring and understanding ecological communities. And the last one there, additive manufacturing, this 3D printing, interesting potential to reduce emissions and minimize production cost and material waste, facilitating circular economy. So lots that we can think about there. Okay, now we're just moving to observations on the work program. And so I think I just put a circle around the goby because maybe the CEO didn't notice it. It's a goby on a Gorgonian sea fan, which you can see upon close observation. Talk about cryptic coloration. That's really good. And I guess this is our screen to show you that STAP screens with the same careful scrutiny that you needed to see that goby. So here are observations on the work program. This photo actually is of Mongolian goats that produce cashmere, and this is an FAO multifocal area project about rehabilitating and conserving mountain landscapes in the Khangai region for improved ecosystem services and community livelihoods so that the goat herders improve globally important biodiversity and mitigate climate change through nature-based solutions. So I thought this would be a good picture to show. Our observations on the work program, we reviewed 44 GEF trust programs, as you heard, the biggest one ever. So the staff is exhausted but happy with the results. And I guess it was the second largest work program in history. So to continue, yes, there were elements that showed consistent improvements. Following the intro of the new PIF template, the length of most of the proposals was notably shorter. In many cases, less than 50 pages, but we are aiming for more like 25 pages, and that does matter if you're reading 44 projects. Most of the proposals clearly are easier to read with a strong and generally concise narrative of the project rationale and description, and the problems and objectives are generally well organized and defined. All of them now include a theory of change with either a narrative description or some use a diagram. But as a professor, we're not yet at the A+ yet. Some areas could be strengthened. Notably, although all these projects had a theory of change, not all of them articulated assumptions underlying the pathways to achieve the project's objectives. And it's really important to explain the connections between actions and the measurable effects and the longer term goal and the logic behind that. On policy coherence, staff appreciates that the projects are now recognizing the importance of it and reporting on it in the PIF design, as Sonja highlighted. And we encourage this to continue. And to strengthen what we're seeing in the policy coherence realm, we encourage project proponents to consider the full breadth of what good policy coherence entails. So sometimes we see something about the national level, sometimes at the subnational level, sometimes at the broad regional level, but rarely really coherently across the three levels. And of course, that depends on what the project is. But that's important to determine if there are gaps or contradictions in policies and incentives or subsidies that can derail the objectives. And so we need to be sure we're looking at that carefully and put in place measures to address if there are these contradictions. And then I give you three exemplary work program. The non-grant instrument is the first one, the Green Global Supply Chain Decarbonization. wonderful theory of change, which showed the barriers and the problems each intervention would address, how the interventions will give you outputs, indicators, outcomes, and the proposed de-risking structure was well presented. And the commitment has been obtained from a global textile industry brand. And there's engagement with stakeholders and coordination and cooperation with existing initiatives. So we found that one quite exciting. The second one by CI in Paraguay applies the model of finance for permanence to address funding and capacity for managing protected areas. The theory of change is great, has very clear causal pathways and components. Again, stakeholder engagement, policy coherence, risks well addressed. And the third one, WWF in South Africa, a strong proposal that outlines an innovative mega living landscape approach to develop national parks and expand the area of protection to meet the 30% target of the Kunming-Montreal Agreement. And in a sense, it's talking about a mosaic of conservation and production landscapes. So let me close and end with this lovely snow leopard captured by a camera trap on the spectacular mountains of Ladakh in North India. And this was chosen from nearly 39,000 entries as a finalist by London's Natural History Museum. So thick snow blankets the ground, as you see, but there's a dense coat on this cat, and its furry foot pads act like snowshoes. And they're very sparsely distributed across 12 countries in Central and South Asia. And the GEF has a long history of supporting snow leopard conservation. This includes support of a regional initiative to advance transboundary cooperation in the snow leopard range countries, which are 12, as I say. And there are just 6,500 of these lovely adult snow leopards living in the wild today. And of course, their existence is threatened by poaching, habitat loss, and conflict, and the species is still listed as vulnerable by IUCN, but the population of snow leopards is somewhat increasing. Last year, Bhutan reported an increase of 40% in their snow leopard population. So I wanted to end on this cautiously optimistic note that we are bringing this magnificent animal back from the brink of extinction for future generations to marvel at. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rosina. I think we all heard what he has presented, and from my perspective, the report is a little bit challenging in terms of where we're going, some of the environmental issues. But also what is interesting about the report is showing what we can do to address the issues. And that is what is very important for us. I have to thank her and the team for that wonderful work. And hopefully with their possible solution that they're giving us, we'll be able to make way forward in addressing these challenges that face our world. So on that note, I will once again open the floor for questions and comments with respect to the report that is presented for the council. The floor is open. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Faisal has requested the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The GEF CSO network welcomes the report of the chairperson of STAT and the work undertaken in recent times. The specific studies presented also significantly advance the understanding in key areas. The assessment on alternative livelihoods indicates that more work is needed to develop and apply successful models to change current trajectories of economic and community development to a more sustainable pathway. We need to identify and enhance economically viable alternative livelihoods together with associated value chains. At the same time, we also need to see how we can transform existing livelihoods in a more sustainable direction. We asked GEF to look further into this in more detail and develop best practice manuals and learning networks, as well as develop more specific guidance for project design and implementation. With regard to citizen science, we thank STAP for its analysis on citizen science, which identifies its importance for engaging communities in generating key environmental data, as well as cost-effectively monitoring environmental degradation and improvement. We are happy that STAP has identified the GEF CSO network as a potential mechanism that could help GEF to promote engagement in citizen science, as many of our members are active in this area. We support the proposal to enhance support from GEF to citizen science as a key tool to engage civil society and Indigenous people and local communities in the journey to protect and restore our planet. These two studies are important steps to support the development of a whole of society approach, and that we encourage STAP to continue its work. We noted that in the proposal for future work did include some elements looking at the whole of society, and maybe that could be clarified a bit further here, what that might be. And we hope these further studies can help us further engage civil society and Indigenous people and local communities towards a pathway of climate, biodiversity, and land management positive world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Annette, you have the floor.
Thank you, William. And very much heartfelt, big thank you to staff and the wonderful presentation we just heard. It was a excellent mix of truly entertaining information and teachable moments and extremely valuable and interesting facts. Thank you for that. Two things I noted, the issues of blended finance you mentioned, and the additional work that's necessary in order to generate more environmental benefits there. I think that's especially important for us when we are trying to expand into the work with the MDBs and raising private sector finance. And so blended finance is a good instrument for that, but obviously there needs to be more work on also knowledge management and sharing and learning. And the other issue I noticed was the opportunities we have on generating more adaptation results. And I found that extremely interesting, as we're really into trying to raise our imputed shares on adaptation finance, or also with the GEF. There's been a continuous topic for us. So thanks very much for the additional information on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. Gabriela, you have the floor.
Thank you, William, and welcome to our co-chair. It's great to see you. And thanks to Rosina. It's always one of the most entertaining presentations of the GEF Council. And yeah, also very nice. You ended your presentation with the snow leopard, which of course, especially for my constituency, is a very, very important key species, and many GEF projects and programs have gone into its protection and the sustainable use around the livelihoods and so on. So thanks for that. On the blended finance, similar to what Annette was saying, this is very interesting work. Are you intending to share your report on blended finance with a wider community? The MDBs, DFIs, wider sustainable finance communities is engaged in this. For example, under the G20, looking at our Victor from Brazil, we know that there's this work ongoing on nature-based solutions. If there's maybe an interest also to share some knowledge there, that would be interesting to know. On your work on environmental security, we also appreciate that very much. And based on your work, where do you see the concrete room for improvement within the GEF and its programming in fragile and conflict-affected states? Can you suggest any concrete policy improvements and/or amendments? And is the work outlined in the respecting working document of the GEFSEC sufficient from a scientific standpoint? Also, for your paper on alternative livelihoods, Has your research on this also led to some suggestions how to best achieve the anticipated behavioral change that you're describing as being so challenging? And then on the adaptation plan, if it's similar to what Annette was referring to, this is also very interesting, and we would like to know how your findings will be included into the next steps foreseen under the agenda item we discussed on the co-benefits. Maybe also the GEF can reflect on that. Thanks so much for all your very hard work.
Thank you, Gabriele. Ben, you have the floor.
Many thanks, William. And also many thanks to Rosina for the excellent presentation as always, and thanks to you and your staff for putting that together. Firstly, I think it would be remiss of me not to highlight the close engagement I've had with STAP as part of the working group on developing the risk appetite paper, and noting the high quality of experts that STAP brings into the GEF governance, and particularly thanks to Blake and Mark in that respect. Just in terms of some of the points that you raised just now, I think that I read as also Annette mentioned, the blended finance paper. I read that with interest, and I think, you know, in pointing out the complexity of that, that's certainly true. But also, I think the message in the paper which I took was that blended finance, as I think you all know, enables substantial private sector climate finance to be leveraged. And I think that's particularly important in the context of the GEF as we go forward. I think it's worth saying, obviously, that, you know, we need to find I think I made this point, to find a step change in the way we do this. And I think incremental change that we make through the blended finance window doesn't seem to be enough. So I think it'd be great to engage more on that, and useful to see future steps. And I think you said you're going to engage more on that, so that would be very helpful. It was, by the way, it was very interesting to hear there's going to be a workshop next week in that issue. So that was useful information too. On the environmental security and FCAS, fragile and conflict affected states, it was useful to be raising the importance of that issue. Obviously, we've had that conversation already to a certain extent, but it's important to particularly focus on the relationship between environmental change and vulnerability. Obviously, as I said, that relates to a lot of the issues we've talked about in terms of the gap analysis we had yesterday and the risk appetite as well. And I think, yeah, it's important for considering FCAS considerations and GEF program as we move forward, for example, in terms of flexibility and adaptive management. This, of course, is an issue that GEF Secretariat will need to remain cognizant of in the wider views being taken forward and proposed by STAP. We concur with Germany on the usefulness of the work on tracking adaptation co-benefits across the GEF portfolio. I think maybe just to conclude, just to say that we always enjoy these biannual presentations from Rosina, so thank you for that. And however, it's been, I think, very useful for me to engage with STAP between the meetings and to better understand STAP's critical role as part of the GEF governance structure. Many thanks.
Thank you, Ben. Babadram, vous avez la parole.
Merci beaucoup, William. Je voudrais à mon tour remercier également Dr Rosina et l'ensemble des membres du STAP pour le travail remarquable qui a été réalisé. Je vois beaucoup de complémentarité dans le rapport qui vient de nous être présenté et le rapport du Bureau indépendant d'évaluation du FEM, qui, de mon point de vue, nous permet en tout cas d'avoir les informations scientifiques et techniques qui doivent un peu guider l'action du FEM, notamment l'orientation vers les domaines prioritaires sur lesquels nous devons mettre l'accent pour avoir beaucoup plus d'impact sur les grandes tendances d'évolution de notre environnement. Alors, personnellement, j'ai beaucoup apprécié les informations qui sont fournies concernant les questions d'adaptation aux effets du changement climatique, mais je crois qu'il serait beaucoup plus important également de mettre davantage l'accent sur l'importance et le rôle des savoirs locaux, les savoirs endogènes, parce que dans beaucoup de projets qui sont exécutés dans notre pays en matière de protection de l'environnement, le constat qui est fait est que justement ces savoirs locaux-là ont permis de régler beaucoup de problèmes en matière de protection de l'environnement. Je voudrais justement qu'on creuse davantage ces aspects-là pour voir comment la mise en œuvre des savoirs locaux, en tout cas, aide à améliorer les performances des projets financés par le FEM en tant que levier de protection de l'environnement. L'autre aspect également concerne l'atténuation des émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Aujourd'hui, de plus en plus, depuis le dernier rapport du groupe intergouvernemental d'experts sur l'évolution du climat, une orientation majeure a été donnée pour une sortie progressive des énergies fossiles. Mais je crois que pour sortir de ces énergies fossiles, il serait également bon que ces types de rapports scientifiques également puissent davantage mettre l'accent sur les énergies alternatives qui s'offrent à nous. On a vu un peu les orientations qui sont dégagées pour montrer un peu tout ce qui est aujourd'hui potentiel en matière d'énergie nouvelle et renouvelable. Mais si je prends aujourd'hui le cas de l'énergie solaire, il y a un gros déficit technologique et de savoir-faire pour la gestion des déchets issus de ce secteur, que ce soit les déchets issus des panneaux solaires, mais également les déchets issus des batteries qui sont utilisées pour le stockage de l'énergie. Donc, on règle un problème, mais on crée un autre problème. Il faudrait qu'on creuse davantage pour voir comment justement ces problématiques peuvent être résolues en même temps. Et le dernier point concerne un peu la relation entre le STAP et les autres mécanismes scientifiques qui existent dans le cadre des autres accords multilatéraux sur l'environnement, notamment les GEF. Quelle est aujourd'hui la relation de travail qui existe pour mieux consolider l'information scientifique et quelle aussi est la relation que le STAP entretient également avec les structures de recherche, les universités, notamment les universités du Sud, parce que je sais que pour le cas de nos circonscriptions, et particulièrement le Sénégal que je maîtrise un peu plus, le programme de microfinancement du FEM travaille beaucoup avec les universités pour mieux encadrer sur le plan scientifique et technique les projets qui sont financés pour les communautés. Donc, ce serait bien qu'on puisse voir le lien entre le STAP et ces différents mécanismes-là pour consolider les relations et avoir beaucoup plus de relations dans les rapports qui nous sont présentés. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Laura Rajaniemi, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. We would also like to thank the staff for very engaging and entertaining presentation. At the 7th GEF Assembly in August, like you mentioned in your presentation, the staff gave a lot of space to the youth and to indigenous peoples and as active participants, but also in more academic terms. We think that engaging with all related groups is the key to achieving systemic change. The various STAP reports published prior to this meeting manifest the important role of STAP as thinking ahead. The GEF needs to be innovative and have a certain risk appetite, and researching, discussing, and synthesizing information that helps us navigate in a complex world is very valuable. And like many others have already stated, the report on blended finance is very useful in providing concrete examples, and we will also recognize synergies with other funds and processes we are following. And was, of course, very happy to see this theme was also on your future work list. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. Barbara, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much for the informative presentation, and we welcome the report. I appreciated the ant line example, and I will indeed bring that to my dinner table and see if I can engage my teens, which is always tricky, but I'll give it a shot. We thought that the STAP Science Day at the Assembly was a great success. Appreciate STAP's commitment to inclusion. And agree that one of the messages that we heard very clearly is around the importance of continued youth input in Indigenous knowledge And just to echo some of the expressions in the presentation, it's not a one-off, it's not tokenism. It needs to be how we function. And we're certainly pleased to hear that it's reflected in the past and upcoming work of STAP, in particular, the citizen science element. Reinforcing a whole society approach is where we absolutely need to go. And on that, I would be interested in hearing how the work will inform the guidelines to incorporate CBAs, in which I believe was a recommendation in one of the evaluations that we reviewed yesterday. And just to wrap up my remarks, we're just very excited where this work will lead us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rob, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rosina. As always, that was a highlight of the GEF meeting, and I learned something new. I learned about new species that I hadn't heard of, and that's all. I always very much appreciate that. So really, thank you for that very informative report with not such good news at the beginning, but I think the reports that you did were very helpful and interesting. So I particularly, as others have done, I want to highlight the really interesting, fascinating note on blended finance. We think it's really important that the GEF continues to explore and utilize blended finance, and that blended finance will be very helpful in making sure that the work that we do is transformative and catalytic. We also found the paper on alternative livelihoods very interesting. We see this in theories of change all the time. But we've long wondered really whether it's effective, and I think this work is starting to get there, starting to answer those questions, and we're happy to see that and hope that the recommendations in the report are integrated into projects going forward. I also really appreciated the CSO sort of little tweak on talking about transitions of existing livelihoods. I mean, this work is just super hard. It's super hard to make sure that we're really having the interventions are working. And I can say from personal experience, work we do in my office in the artisanal and small scale gold mining, trying to get mercury out of it's just it's a really hard thing to really make that change happen. So really glad we're focusing on this. I also want to just really appreciate the paper on citizen science. I think citizen science is really still so untapped. It's such an untapped resource, and there's so much work that's going on out there. It can really add to our knowledge base on the state of the environment, on air quality, on water quality, and in so many other different areas. I heard recently about a citizen science project, where they collect and analyze the amount of microplastics in the environment. And it's just super interesting. It's super important, really adds to the knowledge base. And it also involves youth and children, and it brings in the whole of society. So I think it ticks all sorts of boxes. And I think we need to continue to sort of really try and incorporate citizen science in the work we're doing. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Prabhas, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the informative presentation. You made reference to climate change in your presentation. Climate justice. Climate justice is a concept that addresses the unequal distribution of the burdens and benefits of climate change and climate action, particularly focusing on the disproportionate impacts on vulnerable communities and marginalized groups. It emphasizes the need for fairness, equity, and accountability in addressing climate change, recognizing that those who are least responsible for causing climate change often bear the greatest burdens. So, climate justice seeks to create a more equitable and sustainable future by addressing the root cause of climate change, advocating for the rights of affected communities, and promoting fair and inclusive approaches to climate action that prioritize social justice, equity, and human rights. So in Sri Lanka has a drafted resolution to the UNIA, which will going to held in Nairobi end of this February, regarding non-effective, inclusive, and sustainable multilateral action towards climate justice. We need support of the member countries to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jeanne, vous avez la parole.
Je crois ça. OK. Je m'envoie à mes prédécesseurs pour dire bravo. Bravo à ce contenu assez riche qui couvre presque tous les domaines de l'environnement. Et même vous avez couvert les différents projets qui sont facilités par le GEF et je vous dis merci. Merci pour l'enseignement, parce que moi j'en ai tiré beaucoup d'enseignements par rapport à ce contenu et nous avons besoin de cette documentation et évidemment en faire la transcription pour mieux nous l'approprier. Je suis déjà allé sur la plateforme, je n'ai pas encore trouvé. Je crois que nous avons besoin du support. Cela dit, dans le contenu, sur quelques aspects environnementaux, c'est vrai, il y a des démarches que vous avez évoquées, que nous connaissons, je connais très bien, et pour avoir travaillé sur des projets sous financement GEF, les approches basées sur la nature, l'agriculture intelligente face au changement climatique, et vous en avez parlé. Je remercie pour avoir fait ces rappels, mais je voudrais faire mon petit commentaire. Ces différentes approches restent beaucoup au niveau de nos concepteurs de projets, de nos techniciens projets, mais la descente vers les communautés, il y a un gap sur lequel nous devons travailler pour que cela s'approprie. J'ai bien écouté mon collègue du Sahel et qui vient de partager avec nous le niveau d'appropriation qui se fait au niveau de l'université. Je crois que c'est déjà une porte d'entrée pour que les jeunes puissent s'approprier de ces démarches sur les technologies par rapport au phénomène mondial qu'est le changement climatique. Je pense que nous devons mieux faire descendre cela au niveau des communautés et les confronter aussi aux stratégies, au savoir endogène pour faire une synthèse, pour avoir une synthèse, une symbiose des stratégies endogènes et les stratégies nouvelles que nous apportons. Donc, j'aurais voulu qu'il y ait une recommandation qui fasse peut-être rédiger un document sur ces approches et des documents qui doivent descendre au niveau des communautés. J'ai saisi la thématique aussi sur les plantes envahissantes et qui sont des thématiques, comme vous le savez, des pays côtiers. Tous les pays côtiers, les eaux continentales sont confrontées à l'émergence des plantes envahissantes. Et je voudrais demander le regard de tout le conseil, de nous accompagner à pouvoir travailler sur des concepts de notes, à travailler sur des conceptions pour pouvoir cerner le problème de façon globale, parce que du Bénin au Nigeria, du Bénin au Togo jusqu'au Ghana, nous avons cette problématique et je crois que au niveau de la Gambie aussi, nous avons cette problématique. Donc, tous les pays côtiers ont ce problème de plantes envahissantes que vous avez si bien évoqué ici. Et je crois que les petits financements aussi ont un rôle à jouer par rapport à cette thématique environnementale. Petit financement parce que dans la pratique, en tant que technicien, nous avons déjà eu des sollicitations des communautés, mais sur de grands projets, donc des grands projets en cours de développement, des communautés qui, sous le couvert de l'autorité locale, voudraient que nous les accompagnions à cerner le problème de plantes envahissantes. Cela demandait à peu près moins de 10 000 $. Mais on n'a pas pu le faire, bon, parce que ce n'était pas prévu dans le financement. Et donc, je crois que le petit financement permettra de rendre plus visible, je reviens là-dessus, permettra de rendre plus visible les impacts du financement du FEM par rapport aux problèmes environnementaux. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Karen, you have the floor.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'll be very brief, but I really need to echo others' appreciation of the work of staff as well as a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Also, thank you for reminding us of the STAP Science Day in Vancouver. I think that was really interesting. We are also, as others have mentioned, very supportive of the planned work to strengthen the effectiveness of GEF blended finance project. Looking forward to that. And we are pleased to hear that staff will also continue working with GEF Secretariat on follow-up actions on knowledge management, policy coherence, adaptation results, and risk appetite, to mention some of your coming work. And also linking this to GEF 9 is very useful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Richard, you have the floor.
Thank you, William. Thank you, Rosina, for the presentation, and thank you also for the state paper. Just wanted to reiterate the appreciation of the work of the staff over the last 6 months, including the assembly in Vancouver. Like Ben had said earlier in the working group, especially thank you to Blake and Mark. That's my interaction with the staff more recently, but I know that all the staff members are doing great work and supporting in different ways behind the scenes or in the front in some cases. Like Karen has just mentioned, appreciate the follow-on work, particularly around risk appetite, looking at opportunities for integrating that into the work of both the STAP, but also the GEF more broadly, and also the follow-on work on knowledge management and policy coherence. Looking forward to, as thinking evolves around what's going to be important at GEF in going to GEF 9. And especially appreciate the papers on citizen science and agrovoltaics. I think the agrovoltaics is particularly interesting for me because it actually talks about a real issue that's emerging with the conflict between putting in place renewable energy. For example, in Australia, we've seen a proposal for a new wind farm at a Ramsar location, wetlands. We're also seeing increasing conflicts between farmers and putting in place transmission lines. So this is an emerging trend internationally. It'd be good to look at what could be done more about that. I have 2 questions for the staff. Firstly, what can be done in terms of positively driving innovation projects rather than just assessing the projects coming in for the innovation, but how can we sort of drive that process of innovation in support of the thinking about risks? And secondly, what is happening behind the scenes in terms of interaction with experts in other climate environmental funds, and how do we get greater synergies between those experts and bring it together as part of the broader process of harmonisation and integration across those big funds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Laura Bermúdez, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, William. Y muchas gracias a Rosina y al equipo del staff. Me uno a las felicitaciones por la excelente presentación, como siempre. Desde nuestra circunscripción reconocemos que nos enfrentamos a enormes desafíos de rápida evolución que requieren que en espacios como este, especialmente el staff, sigamos trabajando para lograr identificar cómo generar esos cambios transformacionales en un marco temporal limitado que tenemos debido a la crisis. Por eso quisiéramos hacer referencia al trabajo futuro que nos ha presentado Rosina para el staff y agradecemos la inclusión de temas emergentes, entre ellos los relacionados con avances tecnológicos y sobre todo mecanismos financieros. Tal como se evidenció en la presentación, las transformaciones que requerimos hacer frente a los riesgos a los que nos enfrentamos tienen profundas implicaciones en nuestras sociedades y nuestras economías, mientras vemos los efectos desproporcionados especialmente en los países en desarrollo. Es por ello que resaltamos la importancia de abordar estos desafíos desde una perspectiva integral, poniendo en el centro los elementos de la justicia, la inclusión y la urgencia, como hemos manifestado en estos días. En este contexto es importante seguir trabajando en el desarrollo de instrumentos innovadores que contribuyan a reducir los costos para lograr esos beneficios ambientales globales que estamos buscando, y alternativas como el blended finance y el canje de deuda por naturaleza seguramente aportarán mucho a este objetivo. Quisiéramos reiterar en todo caso que el financiamiento concesional, es decir, los grants, juegan un papel fundamental, por lo que los instrumentos asociados a blended finance deben ser complementarios, y reiterar que desde el GEF podemos proveer insumos valiosos en estas discusiones sobre la reforma del sistema financiero internacional, de manera que pueda incentivar mayores esfuerzos para lograr los beneficios ambientales globales. Y parte de esto es lo que vamos a discutir también en marzo en el Comité de Movilización de Recursos, en el marco del Convenio de Biodiversidad, donde estamos discutiendo con varios de los colegas que están acá estos temas. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Laura. So Rosina, back to you for any comments.
So many comments, so little time. Thank you very much for your compliments. Maybe instead of addressing individually what you said, I'll try to do some bundled topics in the interest of time. First, I do want to say, that STAP and Jeff Sack and the IEO are all very dedicated and serious about working with the next generation. And indeed, one of my own graduate students, Grace Petty, here helped with blended finance and is sitting in the room today. So we are really trying to expand the world of youth who understand both the practitioner and the science side, which I think, as you can see from all the papers we're putting together, it's kind of nobody's job to put that together. So I hope that we are bringing a new generation along. So on the comments regarding our GEF 9 convening, which hasn't happened yet, that's why we raised it today. We're very interested in ideas from Jeff Sec as well as from council and the agencies, what you think would be most useful. And you've put forward a number of ideas, which I think will really help us shape that. But we would like to continue to get those ideas. And I think, as was pointed out, the gap between, a goal and implementing and how, that is really what we're trying to get to. Too often we hear about best practices, but rarely do we hear, as the IEO did yesterday, about things that didn't work and why they didn't work. And that's equally important to learn from. So I'm hoping that the learning community that we bring together can help with that. There was a question about future kind of co-benefits and indicators. And, in our various reports, we have suggested, in particular, I guess it was the recent knowledge management ones, that thinking about GEF 9 RBM, doing numbers of people in hectares may not really get to, say, the proportion of the population below international poverty, or the mortality rate attributed to air pollution, or other indicators that exist already, for example, in the SDGs and MEA. So we have suggested, and maybe the next session, we'll talk more about this, that we might be thinking about some coherence across other co-benefits that are already going to be measured and indicators that are already going to be measured. On environmental security, we do think there needs to be some guidance given to the agencies to improve their project design. Sometimes the projects are talking about building peace. Sometimes they're talking about dealing with conflict in the front side, but sort of these are much like blended finance projects. These are more complex with more moving parts. And so I think, you know, the theory of change, the future narratives need to be really carefully crafted. And so I would suggest, yes, guidance is probably needed on that. On blended finance, we're definitely going to explore more and, you know, obviously focusing first on the context of the GEF. But I do think that as we move into the very necessary blended finance issues related to the nature-based solutions, this is harder than, as I've said, it is to do to work on for things like measuring greenhouse gas reductions. And that's, as we said, started in 1990. But we will continue to explore with external organizations and practitioners on their knowledge. And we hope to address those 4 issues that I raised, you know, beginning next week with the Jeff Sachs meeting, but continue to report on that going forward in council. On alternative livelihoods, yeah, I mean, that always assumes there's going to be behavioral change, which has to be wanted, not imposed. And we will do more work on that. We will continue to look at the literature and at GEF projects. And, you know, in the recently assigned homework from the IEO, we will, the community-based work, we will be bringing in what we've learned from citizen science, from alternative livelihoods, from knowledge management, et cetera, to try to make use of that. And that also has to be informed by policy coherence. STAP's network. Well, we're not that many people, but all of us are deeply involved in a lot of, first, the international science and technical assessment processes, whether it be the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change or the IPBES, or many of us are members of, you know, academies of science or technology. And so we use that network of connections to bring science to you, but equally important, we want to connect more with the CSO network, with the agencies, to get your needs so that we can continue this two-way street. So no, we certainly don't know everything, but the wonderful thing is that we do have these broad and deep connections. And as I said at the beginning, we're increasingly trying to not just be the science folks, but be science, technology, and social science, and with an understanding of economics and governance, et cetera. Let's see. Oh yes, well, there were a couple of questions about circular economy. I mean, I do want to remind you that STAP did 3 reports on circular economy, 1 on plastics, 1 on food, and 1 on climate mitigation. And so, you know, as we were talking about in the agrivoltaic, circular economy approaches will be important, so that these solar panels we may put up all over agricultural lands don't produce a waste problem. And the recent IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel report on climate change, to another question on energy alternatives, it did a good analysis of not just this, but other technologies. And so again, we look at those scientific and technical advisory bodies who have done huge syntheses, 2,000 pages long, often over 7 years, to help guide what we say. So I already talked about the community thing. Yeah, and you know, on KMNL, we really look forward to a timeline and an action plan for that strategy, because so many of you have mentioned how important the learning is, whether it be on blended finance, whether it be on environmental security, whether it be on alternative livelihoods. And so I think the KMNL strategy and what's exactly going to be in it and how it's implemented will be very important to all of the above. And of course, policy coherence, as we've talked about before. Is there more Sunday that I should say? Bringing to market agrivoltaics. Yeah, so our science convening is just one example of how we can bring expertise, but we often go to all these meetings too, and we have deep connections to most of the multilateral environmental agreements. I think I answered most of the questions. Is that right? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosina. Back to you, Kuchen.
Thank you very much, Rosina. And I think we've almost done with this this agenda item, and hence we're not going to have any decision on this. I will now proceed to agenda item 18, which is the relation with conventions and other international institutions. So in that, I would like to announce that the council is honored to have the presence of Monica. Sorry for this language, and also David Cooper in the present in this in person in this session, and they are also well known to you. I think we have been interacting with them for a couple of times. Other convention executive secretaries were unable to be here in person and will address the council virtually on how, and all have to link on a video recorded message. So on that, we'll first have to have a video message from UNFCCC Executive Secretary, Mr. Simon Sitter. Can Simon Sitter take up the floor? Thank you.
It is a pleasure to address the GEF Council today. I'll update you on key outcomes of COP28 and highlight the relevance of those outcomes to the GEF. Parties engaged in Dubai at a time of great urgency. The first global stocktake provided an opportunity to course correct. The conference closed with an agreement that, although not overly prescriptive, signals the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era. It does so by laying the ground for a swift, just, and equitable transition, underpinned by deep emission cuts and scaled up finance. Through this first global stocktake, 198 countries agreed to ratchet up climate action before the end of the decade, with the overarching aim to keep the global temperature limit to 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. In a major step forward, parties agreed on targets for the global goal and adaptation and on its framework. The GGA framework is comprehensive, covering the themes of water, food, health, ecosystems, infrastructure, poverty eradication, and cultural heritage. With this, we can look to the future on adaptation, reflecting aspiration and ambition. As you know, COP28 made a historic agreement on the operationalization of the funding arrangements for addressing loss and damage, including a new dedicated fund under the UNFCCC. It was, in fact, the first time a substantive decision was adopted on the first day of the conference. Commitments to address loss and damage, totaling $661 million to date, is an important symbol of global solidarity. It reflects both the urgency of the climate emergency and a step forward in international climate justice. So what will this mean for the GEF and its work? The outcomes from Dubai signify a shifting of gears. Through the Global Stocktake Outcome document, countries signaled a clear commitment to reach the low emission and climate resilient development pathway and full implementation of the Paris Agreement. This year will be a finance COP. Current climate finance flows channeled by multilateral, bilateral, and private sources taken together are far short of the trillions we need to support developing countries with clean energy transitions, implementing their national climate plans and adaptation efforts. Parties made clear it is now crucial to reform the multilateral financial architecture. We need to scale up the use of grants and concessional finance and accelerate the ongoing establishment of new and innovative sources of finance. It means that the role of the GEF is more crucial than ever, both in mitigation and adaptation efforts. The parties were clear in their request to the GEF. The GEF Trust Fund must continue to serve as an assurance that financial resources for climate actions are accessible to developing countries in an equitable and country-driven manner. They expect the GEF to support developing countries to fulfill their reporting requirements under the Paris Agreement. With the finalization of the enhanced transparency framework, we heard that many parties are interested in how they can ratchet up their institutional capacities and prepare the biennial transparency reports. The parties are supportive of further progress on efforts by GEF to work with other climate finance institutions and the private sector. I congratulate the GEF for the mobilization of $179 million for LDCF and the special climate change fund announced at COP28. These are steps in the right direction, but we are far from where we should be. According to UNEP, the adaptation fund gap in developing countries is likely to be 10 to 18 times as great as current finance flows. I encourage parties to continue to scale up their pledges to these funds. The overwhelming message should be this: adaptation funding for the poorest and most vulnerable nations is not an expense. It is an investment in the safety and well-being of all people. More work awaits. Simply speaking, we need more money flowing to developing countries, and it must be easier to access, particularly by communities and civil society organizations on the ground, so that the resources can flow rapidly to those who need it urgently. Finance is at the center of the effort to transition to a post-fossil fuel world. Additional, affordable, and easily accessible finance drives action and builds trust. The GEF is central in the efforts to make climate finance available. We thank you for your efforts and promise close collaboration and support in the crucial years ahead. I thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. The next on the agenda is to hear, we invite Mr. Manuel de Sapa Suarez, Under Secretary General for Legal Affairs at the United Nations Legal Council, to address the Council.
Excellencies, distinguished members of the Council, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to deliver these brief remarks on the status of the BBNJ agreement and the cooperation between the GEF Secretariat and my own office through the Division for Ocean Affairs and the Law of the Sea toward promoting a better understanding of the agreement and preparing for its entry into force. The adoption of the BBNJ agreement this past June was an historic achievement. This groundbreaking agreement significantly strengthens ocean governance for the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity in over 2/3 of the ocean. This agreement will make crucial contributions to achieving the ocean-related goals and targets of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This is why my office places such high importance on supporting states to ensure its swift entry into force and early implementation. Distinguished members of the Council, since the agreement opened for signature just a few months ago, it has been signed by 85 states and the European Union. I'm also very pleased to note that Palau has become the first state to ratify the agreement and therefore its first party. I hope this will serve as an inspiration for other states. We all wish that the magic number of 60 instruments of ratification, approval, acceptance, or accession needed for the entry into force of the BBNJ agreement be reached as soon as possible. And to prepare for the entry into force of this legally binding instrument and in response to a request from the General Assembly, my office is implementing a program to promote a better understanding of the BBNJ agreement and prepare for its entry into force. The program includes capacity building and technical assistance activities. In this context, it is encouraging that in response to its inclusion as part of the funding mechanism under the BBNJ agreement, the GEF Council authorized the use of up to 34 million for the funding of ratification support and early action activities for the BBNJ agreement. The GEF Secretariat and the Division for Ocean Affairs and the Law of the Sea in my office, which is performing temporarily the Secretariat functions under the agreement, they are working closely to ensure coordination of efforts and the efficient use of resources by avoiding gaps and duplications in the delivery of assistance. As a first step, the division and the GEF Secretariat are conducting an initial survey of capacity building and technical assistance needs, including with regard to making progress towards signature and ratification, approval, acceptance, or accession, to inform the development of future assistance in support of becoming parties to the BBNJ agreement and its early implementation. We also thank the GEF Secretariat for consulting with us on the initial guidelines for enabling activities and ratification support projects by the GEF Council, which are under consideration at this meeting. While this is a promising first step, we hope that this cooperation between the GEF Secretariat and my office will continue beyond the aid replenishment of the GEF Trust Fund. Such cooperation will ensure that needed assistance to states is delivered in a coordinated and cost-effective manner. My office stands ready to work with the GEF Secretariat and the Council to ensure that together we support the goals set up by states of swift entry into force and early implementation of the BBNJ agreement. I wish you a very fruitful 66th Council meeting, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I would also like to invite Mr. Ralph Payet, the Executive Secretary, Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention, to address the Council virtually. Mr. Payet. Yeah. Okay, without wasting more time, maybe.
I'm here. I was just added as a panel, so.
Go ahead, please.
If I can ask the Secretariat to load my presentation, please, that would be nice.
Okay.
The Council members, delegates, and colleagues, I apologize for not being able to be with you at the GEF Council in Washington. I will be presenting a little bit about the outcome of the triple COPs that happened earlier this year, the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention COPs, as well as focus on some issues of interlinkages with other processes, notably the Biodiversity Convention, the UNFCCC, as well as the Montreal Protocol. In terms of the key outcomes of the triple COPs, I will start with the Stockholm Convention, as this is part of the GEF financing area. We had the sixth review of the financial mechanism, and the COP adopted the terms of reference for that sixth review. And the review will cover August 2020 to July 2024, with a special emphasis on the activities concluded during that period. The
Rolf,
COP
just so you know, we're getting your presentation down. It'll probably take another minute. You can continue to talk, but just so that you know that it's not quite there yet.
All right. Then they also agreed for a needs assessment for 2026 to 2030, and the COP also adopted the terms of reference for this needs assessment. And of course, there will be a number of validation activities undertaken to refine the data that is needed for this. Now, in terms of Stockholm decisions and input into the 9th GEF replenishment, there are a number of chemicals listed under Annex A, and this is methoxychlor without specific exemptions, dichlorine plus with specific exemptions, and UV 328 with specific exemptions. And just to note that two of these chemicals, the last two ones, dichlorine plus and UV 328, are also additives to plastics. The Stockholm decisions also focused on deadlines for PCBs, and this is the work that we've been engaged together with both donor countries, donor agencies, partner implementing agencies, and the GEF in devising a PCB strategy for the 2025 COPs. Further work has been mandated on sustainable financing for the management and the phase out of PCBs. And they've asked us to undertake key intersectional processes. First one, engaging the private sector, especially those that own PCBs or currently have PCBs on their premises, and also working on linking PCBs with the energy transition, again, a link with the renewable energy transition. Thirdly, mainstreaming PCB national development agendas, looking at, again, upgrading of energy grids and so on. And then appointed a PCB small intersectional working group to support that work. In terms of other decisions taken, which will be of relevance to the GEF, as you all know, the mechanism on the compliance mechanism of Stockholm Convention has been under negotiations for the last 15 years. And at the last COP last year, the COP agreed and adopted procedures and mechanisms for a compliance mechanism. There was also the launch of the report of the second effectiveness evaluation, and also they adopted the global monitoring results. And finally, there was endorsement of a new regional center, and that is the Stockholm Regional Center to be based in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, in terms of work on cross-cutting issues, has the slides gone up? Let me see. The slides gone up? Anyway, I will share my slides with the council because I know time is of consequence here. So work on cross-cutting issues with the UNFCCC. We identified linkages between chemicals, waste, and climate change. And in 2023, COPs recognized that actions taken under the BRS conventions may contribute to achieving the UNFCCC's objectives, and requested the Secretariat to enhance its cooperation with the UNFCCC Secretariat. As a result of this, the BRS Secretariat participated in COP28 and was engaged at different levels, different events, and in particular contributed to events on the Transparency Initiative launched by the UNFCCC. The reports on the linkages were also published in 2011, was updated in 2021, which included opportunities for integrated actions. In terms of key linkages,
Rolf, which slide would you like us to be at?
I'm on number 9 now.
Number 9, okay.
Yes.
And then tell us when to change.
Okay, perfect. In terms of key linkages and co-benefits, the COP looked at interconnected and mutually reinforcing phenomena, for example, climate change causing increases in pollution by amplifying releases of pollutants and making species who are already stressed in struggling due to climate change and making them even more vulnerable. And also exploring the nexus with climate change and pollution, which often have the same sources. They also looked at opportunities for synergies to tackle pollution and climate change simultaneously. And that is looking at solid waste management that will allow for significant greenhouse gas emissions reductions if solid waste management is done in an environmentally sound manner. They also discussed and look at circular economy approaches which can promote waste prevention, waste reuse, recycling, and replacement of fossil fuels as well, and feedstock by secondary raw materials, which can also reduce significant greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, going beyond that, waste is to be seen as a resource which can bring together environmental benefits, economic opportunities, as well as resource conservation. Next slide, please. As mentioned before, the BRS participated in COP28, and we participated in over 10 side events, and we explored the theme of climate change and waste management, circularity, plastic pollution, sustainable trade, looking at supply chains, and of course, the impact of waste, especially plastics, within the ocean environment. We continue cooperation with UNFCCC and other relevant partners that will include UNEP, UN Habitat, UNDP, UNODC, UNCTAD, and the private sector and civil society, in particular to showcase waste chemical management as contributing to the efforts at climate mitigation. Also, there were significant discussions and opportunities for us to look at how we can integrate chemicals and waste issues into the NDCs. The work has started for us through the BRS focal points to enhance the integration of waste and chemicals management in the next round of NDC preparation. Next slide, please. This brings me to presenting cross-cutting issues that we are involved in particular with the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the new Global Biodiversity Framework. Looking at the interlinkages there, the work is starting on assisting BRS focal points in better integrating BRS Convention objectives and the GBF targets, in particular Target 7. And a report is to be developed to advise the COP on work being done in that area. Further cooperation has also started with the CBD Secretariat on the development and implementation of the GBF targets and indicators. Further cooperation is also starting with UNEP and UNEP-led initiatives on biodiversity loss issues, and such as the Burn 3 conference follow-up, which happened last week or 2 weeks ago, and we also preparing for a UNIA 6 side event on interlinkages. We also look forward to enhancing cooperation with IPBES on thematic reports. And finally, the integration of biota data on the global monitoring plan under the Stockholm Convention. In terms of looking at cross-cutting issues between the GFC and the Montreal Protocol, and that's the next slide, slide 14. Sorry if you can skip to slide 14. As you all know, the global framework on chemicals was adopted last year, and the BRS conventions contribute to achieving the SDGs as well as the achievement of the 28 targets under the global framework on chemicals. The COP called on the parties to take into account the strategic objectives and targets of the global framework on chemicals in their actions to implement the BRS conventions. And in that line, we are currently working with UNEP, who holds the secretariat for the global chemical framework on chemicals, to see how we can further enhance the implementation of this framework. With regards to the Montreal Protocol, there has been requests from the COP of the MOP, the Montreal Protocol Convention, in enhancing cooperation, especially with the Basel Convention. And the COP requested the Secretariat to enhance this cooperation and coordination with the Ozone Secretariat, of course, on issues of common interest. To note that some of the chemicals listed as ODS are also chemicals of concern considered, for example, under the Stockholm Convention. And also there's the issue raised of the dumping of obsolete chemicals and obsolete equipment under the Montreal Protocol in countries who don't have the capacity to handle those kinds of equipment. We're currently preparing a report which will highlight the interlinkages between the BRS conventions and that of the Montreal Protocol. So with those few words, I know time is limited. I would like to thank you for your attention. If you can move to the last slide, and there you can scan the QR code, which will give you access to our website and all relevant information with regards to the work that we are doing. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Payet. And next, I also like to invite Mrs. Monica, Executive Secretary, Minamata Convention, who is with us to give her presentation. Madam.
Yes, thank you so much, and good day, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. So thank you, co-chair Carlos Manuel, secretary, Cheese, all GEF team, and my colleague David and GEF council members for the very warm welcome. I'm pleased to be here to report on the outcomes of the 5th meeting of the Conference of the Parties of the Minamata Convention held last year. I know you are receiving a lot of information here, so I really admire your capacity to process all these, and I'm asking for 10 minutes of your attention. And also my apologies, I will exceed the time by 3 minutes. I can with the full confidence say that the COP5 was really remarkable. It was remarkable because delegates were not divided, but united. And the outcomes are more than many of us could expect. And I would say it was multilateralism at its best. I could only wish for such COPs in the future. And I would like to thank for the GEF for being with us for the entire COP week and also for making your contribution. So it was a great success to all of us. The COP had many positive outcomes of technical nature. However, I'm not going to go into the details of those at this council meeting. They include the establishment of a numerical threshold for mercury-containing waste to be controlled by the convention provisions. It includes amendments to the annexes of the convention to expand the list of mercury-added products to be phased out and to phase out the use of mercury manufacturing processes. Just give me one example of a product that will be phased out by 2027. All fluorescent types of lamps will be phased out. And in practice, it means making a global shift to LED lighting, which will result in a huge energy savings and avoidance of CO2 emissions. The outcomes also include matters related to controlling emissions from new and existing sources listed in Annex D. These are coal-fired power plants and industrial boilers, non-ferrous metals production, cement production, waste incineration. And I'm listing those 4 sources at each and every council meeting because this is such an important issue for the success of the Minamata Convention to address those sources and, in fact, success of the GEF as its financial mechanism. Now, let me turn your attention to some of the outcomes that have been discussed at this council meeting. And firstly, I'm very pleased to inform you that COP made major advancements regarding engagement of civil society in the work of the Minamata Convention. It adopted a decision on the effects of mercury pollution on indigenous peoples and on local communities, in which COP recognized the importance of broadening participation of indigenous peoples as well as local communities in the implementation of projects and programs undertaken under the Minamata Convention. Upon the COP request, the Secretariat will embark on a process to compile views on the needs and priorities of indigenous peoples as well as local communities with regards to the effects of mercury on their health, livelihoods, culture, and knowledge, and this will be reported to the next COP for its consideration. We will also work on supplementary guidance on the engagement of indigenous peoples as well as local communities in the development and implementation of national action plans for artisanal and small-scale gold mining. Together with the host country, Brazil, the Secretariat organized a meeting of indigenous peoples and local communities for Amazon countries last September. The meeting was run by indigenous peoples themselves who delivered their messages to the Minamata Convention parties in the region during the COP5 regional preparatory meeting in Brasilia. And this was highly impactful meeting and a pilot which we would like to replicate in other regions in the future. I'm also pleased to report to you that Minamata Convention has a full-fledged gender action plan in place. And here I would like to express my great appreciation to the GEF Secretariat for collaborating with us on the issue of mainstreaming gender. Indigenous peoples, local communities, women and youth, as noted in the document on social inclusion for this meeting, are agents of change. And I cannot see how Minamata Convention could be successful without a full and meaningful engagement. Secondly, Partly took several decisions to complete arrangements for evaluating the effectiveness of the Minamata Convention. COP adopted 36 indicators to measure effectiveness, establish effectiveness evaluation group to oversee the work, including of a scientific body that will work on that issue. And the aim is to finalize the first effectiveness evaluation in 2027. I hope GEF projects will provide strong evidence base in line with the Minamata Convention indicators. And thirdly, I'm happy to be sitting next to David Cooper. I would like to report to you on mercury and biodiversity. It was a standalone agenda item during our COP, and parties took a decision on mercury and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which speaks of reflecting national mercury reduction and control targets in countries' revised or updated national biodiversity strategies and action plans to align with GBF. The decision also encourages parties through the operational focal points of the GEF to integrate mercury action into projects developed under biodiversity focal area and integrated programs, as well as through the new Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. Further, the COP invited the CBD COP to consider additional indicators under Target 7 of GBF to cover highly hazardous chemicals and mercury, and we have already started collaborating on this matter with my CBD Secretariat colleague. I believe this recent development is of relevance to the suite of indicators used to measure global environmental benefits within GEF. And all these decisions were underpinned by analytical work done by the Secretariat, similar to the one presented to you on the GEF work vis-a-vis GBF targets. And as has been already mentioned by Rolf, we were also with the strong mandate fully participating in the so-called Burn 3 conference, which was convened by UNEP with support of Switzerland, co-chaired by Mexico and Sweden, to support synergies between relevant multilateral environmental agreements, including our convention for the implementation of GBF. And the outcome of that conference will be reported to INEA 6. And further on integration, in another decision, COP noted the critical importance of full implementation of the Article 7 of the Convention on artisanal and small-scale gold mining to achieving the objectives of the Convention and contributing to the goals and targets of GBF, and called on parties and the GEF to make further efforts to seek opportunities to advance implementation of Article 7 in the context of projects related to biodiversity, land degradation, international waters, and trade. And this leads me to the second review of the financial mechanism of the Minamata Convention completed at COP5. Decision on that matter reflects on the GEF in a very positive light, and among others provide details to supplement the existing COP guidance to the GEF. I trust that you have all received or soon will receive that decision, as well as the report of the second review. There is much to say about the review. However, in interest of time, let me be brief. Parties welcomed the historic aid replenishment of the GEF Trust Fund and again expressed their full support to working across focal areas IPs. The report of the second review offers a number of conclusions and several recommendations of relevance to the upcoming GEF 9 deliberations and to project development under the GEF 8 programming directions. So what all these COP5 outcomes mean as we move forward? I very much hope that we will be able to report a significant amount of GEF programming at COP6 in 2025, and that the pace of project development for chemicals and waste focal area, and specifically for mercury, will be in line with the evolving convention and implementation deadlines. I've heard at this meeting that the level of programming for chemicals and waste will take up the speed in the course of the year. So this is news I wanted to hear. Many Minamata Convention priorities are being covered one by one. However, as I said, the work on controlling listed emission sources is urgent. For many parties, GEF-supported Minamata initial assessments provide the initial groundwork to inventory these sources, but the pace of implementation really needs to pick up. Another example where investments are needed is supply and trade of mercury, and I'm pleased that the GEF has some support going to a regional project on mercury trade, and we hope other regions will benefit also from such programming. As you know, I have been a very strong proponent of integrated action. Our parties welcomed the GEF 8 replenishment and its architecture, which anticipated lifting up action in all areas. However, that opportunity has not been fulfilled for the Minamata Convention. The integrated programs of GEF have not been serving the needs of Minamata Convention so far. However, I see a clear pathway for Minamata Convention mandates to be fulfilled, not only through chemical and waste focal area, but also in the context of broader and innovative efforts of integrated programs, and where mercury action is one important piece of the puzzle of transformation that the GEF and we all aspire to. And this is even more so in the light of remarkable COP5 outcomes and in the context of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and in fact, the new global framework on chemicals. So what will the GEF 9 bring? I have no doubt that our 149 and growing parties will have high expectations matching their needs for GEF 9. As always, we in the Secretariat are ready to engage in the upcoming process of GEF 9 replenishment design. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. And I would like also call Mrs. Andrea Meza. Oh, sorry. Mr. David Cooper, Acting Executive Secretary, Convention on Biological Diversity, to present this report. Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you and the CEO for this opportunity to update the Council on some relevant work under the Convention on Biological Diversity. In the interest of time, I won't attempt to provide a full report on the outcomes of COP15, which I think many of you know very, very well, but we'll rather focus on the path to COP16. And as you all know, the venue of COP16 and the concurrent meetings of the Cartagena and Nagoya protocols was recently announced, and we're all very much looking forward to meeting in Colombia in the second half of October this year. And once again, I would like to express my appreciation to Colombia for the offer to host this meeting. I recently visited Bogota to meet with ministers and officials and leaders of indigenous organizations, among others, and was very impressed by the dedication and enthusiasm we see there, by the leadership there. As a mega diverse country, I think with such strong leadership, we could not have wished for a better host. Clearly, the focus of COP16 must be to demonstrate momentum towards the goals and targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, our biodiversity plan, and to strengthen support for the implementation of this ambitious plan. And so finance will be a major focus of the COP, both on the official agenda and through high-level parallel events that we are currently discussing with the incoming presidency. Currently, parties to the convention are working to translate the global ambition of the plan into national ambition, setting national targets and updating their national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And here we acknowledge the important support from GEF 7 and GEF 8 for this vital process. Parties will present their national targets and updated NBSAPs to COP16, and also have the opportunity to report on concrete achievements in terms of policies and actions on the ground. And on this basis, COP16, aided by a meeting, the 5th meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation taking place just before COP16, will have a first opportunity to review progress towards those goals and targets. So in this context, we really very much welcome the second GEF 8 work plan approved by this council on Monday. The work programs agreed last June and this week are the 2 largest ever, each with a large share for biodiversity and with major contributions for biodiversity from the integrated programs. Since countries only have actually a few years to achieve the 2030 targets, this front loading of the GEF 8 resources for biodiversity is of course really necessary, and we very much welcome it. But it also underlines the need for complementary scaled up funding to be provided through the new GBF fund, if this pace is to be sustained throughout the GEF 8 period, as indeed it must be. I'll say more about the GBF fund at the dedicated council meeting tomorrow, but allow me to reiterate our appreciation from the Secretariat to the council for the establishment of this new fund, responding to the requests of the COP in decisions 15.7 and 15.15 so quickly. And we also welcome the recent contributions to the new fund from some donors and urge additional contributions so that the call the COP made in those same decisions for substantial contributions to this fund commensurate with target 19 be realized. I'd also like to acknowledge the efforts by this council to streamline the project cycle and acting on the other requests from the COP. So council members and observers, of course, the GEF plays a particularly important and a particularly visible role in providing finance for the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. But we know, and parties recognize this at COP15, that a comprehensive strategy is needed to mobilize financial resources from all sources. And to this end, the COP established an advisor committee on resource mobilization with 3 main tasks. First, to explore the current biodiversity finance landscape with a view to assessing efficiency, effectiveness, gaps, and overlaps, and thereby identify opportunities for improving the availability and efficiency of funding. Secondly, to align the convention strategy for resource mobilization with the new GBF. And thirdly, to explore various proposals for a global instrument on biodiversity finance, including whether or not this should be a new instrument or the existing GBF fund, as well as possible arrangements for the DSI fund, which I'll mention more about in a moment. The committee held its first in-person meeting in Kinshasa, DRC, in September, and has held a number of virtual meetings since. I want to thank Mark Zimski and the CEO for contributing to that meeting. It will hold a second in-person meeting in Villa de Leyva, Colombia, near Bogota, in March. And then this committee will report to the fourth meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation in Nairobi in May, and then of course onwards to COP16, where all of these issues will be key issues. On the broader finance front, we've seen a number of encouraging developments, and this includes the launch by the multilateral development banks on the margins of COP28 of their common principles for tracking nature positive finance. We, I think, all see an enhanced role also for the MDBs in the GEF, and I know that will be discussed in the coming days, as it was in Brasilia. We've also seen the heightened interest of the finance sector more broadly, both public and private, perhaps exemplified by the launch of the recommendations of the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures last September at the New York Stock Exchange. So COP16 and the concurrent meetings of the two protocols will have very full agendas. Those agendas largely defined by the mandates of COP15. And in preparation, of course, a number of intersessional meetings have been held or will be held. So Substa 24, Substa held its 24th session in October last year in Nairobi. Will hold its 25th session again in Nairobi in May. Key issues being addressed by Substa relate to further developing the indicator framework, an important part of monitoring progress towards those goals and targets of the GBF. Some of the many other issues being addressed by Substa include the relationship between biodiversity and climate change, developing a global plan of action on biodiversity and health, and a rise in scanning of synthetic biology and its implications for the convention, among others. The subsidiary body on implementation will have its fourth meeting in May, focusing on looking at all the mechanisms to monitor progress and to support implementation of the convention and the global biodiversity framework. And of course, the advisory committee on resource mobilization, which I just mentioned, will report to that. SBI will also address other issues of direct relevance to the financial mechanism, including consideration of the four-year outcome-oriented framework to inform GEF 9 and analysis of the funding needs to implement the convention and the global biodiversity framework, as well as the sixth quadriennial review of the financial mechanism. Another important topic very much highlighted at COP15 would be very important COP16 is the role of indigenous peoples and local communities. The working group on Article 8J meeting in Geneva in November has developed a draft program of work on this topic, and that will be considered by COP16. Also in Geneva in November was the first meeting of a dedicated working group to negotiate to operationalize the multilateral mechanism for the fair and equitable sharing of benefits from digital sequence information on genetic resources, including the development of a global fund. There will be a second meeting of that group in Montreal in August this year, and there is an intersessional process underway in the meantime, including a number of meetings of an informal advisory group, as well as a number of other informal processes going on in parallel. This, of course, is another ambitious process due to be completed at COP16 and has the potential to create a fund that of significant size to support implementation of the GBF. So in closing, let me again just sort of reflect on the ambition of the GBF, the goals and targets of the GBF, and the enormous common challenge we have to meet them. I think we can all be encouraged by the widespread support for the GBF, including, as we see, by the other conventions, as Monica and Ralph have highlighted just now. We saw at COP28 really for the first time in terms of the official outcome text of a climate convention, extremely strong references to biodiversity and to the GBF. We know that implementation, we know that success will require all of us. It will require a whole of government, whole of society approach. The GEF is a key trusted partner in this. We look forward to further strengthening that partnership, further strengthening the role of the GEF in supporting the implementation of the framework, both directly and in terms of how it can leverage broader support from other sources. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sir David Cooper. And now I would like to offer the floor to Mrs. Andrea Meza, a Deputy Secretary, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD. Mrs. Meza will be joining us virtually. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, distinguished members of the GEF Council and UN colleagues, Carlos Manuel and the GEF team. Thank you for having me. And in the interest of time, I will try to be brief. I will share with you the main outcomes of our 21st session of the Committee for the Review of the Implementation of the Convention, in our language, CRIC 21, that took place in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. It is our intersessional meeting. Also, a quick report on the implementation of some strategic COP decisions. And I will close my intervention highlighting some issues of interest in this work with the GEF. So on CRIC, we looked at the reports made by the country parties. And these reports are generating important information to consider. We see that despite considerable efforts and commitments, it was revealed that in the period between 2015 and 2019, around 100 million hectares of healthy and productive land have been degraded each year. And if trends persist, 1.5 billion hectares must be restored by 2030 to achieve the land degradation neutrality goal. So we are seeing that the CRIC is generating important information for different processes to be considered. And CRIC also paid a lot of attention to sun and dust storms. And on November 15, a high-level event on sun and dust storms was convened by the government of Uzbekistan, and it recognized sun and dust storm as a global problem that the convention will need to address more aggressively and to move forward this agenda. The other elements were related to empower women in land restoration efforts and building gender resilience, also as key priorities. The parties also welcomed the work done by GEF to support national reporting process and the enabling environment to advance UNCCD implementation. And the other critical issue that we saw during the CRIC and parties also welcome is the report on the work of the Intergovernmental Working Group on Drought. And please, I will come back on this work of the IWG on drought. So we are anticipating that a lot of these issues that were highlighted in the CRIC will feature with a lot of centrality in the next in our next COP that will take place in Saudi Arabia in December 2024. Now, I would like to make a brief comments on the implementation on some COP15 decisions. And there has been a robust progress on land degradation neutrality. You probably recall that 112 countries participated in the first round of land degradation neutrality target setting program, a process that contributed to identified 500 million hectares for improved management and restoration. Now we're moving to the second phase of this LDN TSP 2.0, which we will be launching this second phase in Qatar with a capacity building workshop very soon in February. And in this second phase, 18 countries are aiming to revise and strengthen their LDN targets to take UNCCD implementation to the next level. And how is this happening, this next level? Is in this refined approach is to give policy coherence by mainstreaming LDN into integrated land use planning frameworks with national efforts to set a specific, time-bound, quantitative, gender-responsive, and spatially explicit targets. So we see that this process, it could be very useful, of course, when we talk about synergies on the different conventions. So for this purpose, the UNCCD is also publishing a supplementary guidelines for strengthening land restoration commitments and targets that will empower government partners, private sector in implementing this transformative land restoration agenda. On drought resilience, we continue the process of supporting countries on drought plans, enhancing capacities through the drought toolbox, and the launching of some regional communities of learning and practice. What we are seeing, and it's the drought is hitting all regions of the world, and we see a big appetite coming from the countries in elevating the profile of this agenda. In terms of the pipelines of projects, through our global mechanism with support of different partners and countries, we continue working on integrated and programmatic pipeline of projects. We are taking the TSP setting program process to fit the pipeline of projects at regional, country, and private sector level. And we are responding to calls from parties at COP15 for more cross-sector collaboration and support to flagship initiatives such as the Great Green Wall in the Sahel, Great Green Wall in Southern Africa, new emerging multi-country approaches to deliver effective synergies in SEEDS, Caribbean and Pacific, in the Dry Corridor in Central America, among others. So we know and that we will need GEF to help to take these programs move forward, especially in terms of the synergies agenda. On COP16, as we mentioned, it will happen in Riyadh. We are envisioning something big. We have an incumbent presidency who wants to make this COP in Riyadh a turning point for the loud and drought agenda. So we're expecting important COP decisions and the launch of an ambition agenda up to 2030. The COP presidency is clear about the importance of having this whole of a government and whole of society approach, and about understanding and working on the land, water, nature, climate nexus. So we see here a great opportunity to accelerate action. Just to close some strategic issues for GEF, we welcome the integrated programs and approach. And it's important to see that land is the operational nexus to achieve climate and biodiversity goals. So investing in land can really facilitate to give policy coherence to development and environmental goals. Countries just have one territory where we need to implement both measures, both goals. And if we put and give more centrality to land, we will be able to give this policy coherence. The LDN target setting process can be a strategic tool with concrete measure mapping targets can be a very good exercise to facilitate coherence among the different plans. And this is just a proposal. How about supporting NDCs and NBC SAPs, but with maps? This will really facilitate this integration. And from our reporting system is a clear call to action to restore this 1.5 billion hectares up to 2030. And we know that our incoming presidency will really like to work around this agenda. On drought resilience, we're expecting that parties will adopt a landmark decision on drought to move from this reactor approach to this proactive approach. And in terms of flagships, we're identifying the need to invest in early warning systems, drought plans, and investments in different sectors to generate resilience in agriculture, such as crop resistance, irrigation, water storage, water management, of course, nature-based solutions, and as well sand and dust storms. So this is just some of the comprehensive elements that we're also considering in some of these flagship initiatives. So colleagues, we count on GEF and all the GEF stakeholders to join us. We hope to see you there in Riyadh. And let me just close my intervention with a reflection that I really like. Destiny is not a matter of chance, it's a matter of choice. It is not a thing to be waited for, it's a thing to be achieved. William Jennings Bryan. So thank you for your attention and hope to see you in Riyadh.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I think this marks the last presentation from. So now I would like to give the floor for comments from the members or questions. So the floor is open.
Thank you. Faisal, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. The GEF CSO Network welcomes the report on relations with conventions and other international organizations. We note the very comprehensive engagement with convention bodies and meetings and work to ensure that GEF is compliant and responsive to convention guidance. We wish to highlight 5 issues. Firstly, multifocal area and synergies between conventions. The network encourages further actions by GEF to enhance synergy between actions to implement different conventions. It is already well established that work to reverse land degradation, restore biodiversity, is critical to address as well as enhance resilient climate change. As highlighted in the statement by UNCCD just now, the land, water, nature, climate nexus is a critical focus. There are also important synergies with chemicals and waste-related conventions that should be expanded. Enhancing flexibility and incentives to adopt multifocal area programs within GEF should be an important strategy moving forward, especially in the planning for GEF 9. Secondly, action to generate sufficient resources for the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. We believe it is critically important that all countries represented here in the GEF Council redouble their efforts to expedite ambitious contributions to the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund to ensure that there's a minimum of 2 billion for the remainder of the GEF 8 period and at least 10 billion up to 2030. Efforts should be taken to encourage significant contributions from other sources, such as the European Union and emerging economies. Thirdly, engagement of indigenous people and local communities and civil society organizations in the work of the Minamata Convention. We note the decision by the recent COP of the Minamata Convention on the impact of mercury on indigenous people and local communities, as well as the statement today to emphasize the importance of engagement of civil society in the implementation of GEF-financed activities to support the convention. Members of the GEF CSO network are active in the area of chemicals and mercury in particular, and so seek to enhance further collaboration to meet the convention targets. Fourthly, linkage to civil society associated with conventions. As the Council is aware, there are very active and diverse CSO groups which are following all multilateral environment agreements, including those supported by GEF. We would like to suggest that GEF, with assistance of the GEF CSO network, reach out to these CSO constituencies in a more formal manner, such as organizing dialogues with such groups on the sidelines of future COP meetings. We have done this from time to time in the past, but not in a systematic manner. We would also like to propose that GEF, in partnership with the GEF CSO network, prepare some special events at upcoming COP meetings in 2024, such as CBD COP16, UNFCCC COP29, and USCCD COP in Saudi Arabia. This could include showcasing achievement of GEF in partnership with civil society, and also dialogues or meetings at the GEF Pavilion or pavilions of GEF agencies. GEF support for CSOs to participate in the COPs could also enhance this approach. This could also be a mechanism for enhanced engagement of existing CSO constituencies linked to conventions for indigenous peoples, youth, and NGO. We believe that this can enhance engagement between GEF and civil society in these focal areas and enhance the creation of broader coalitions to move forward the proposed whole of society approach. Finally, on access to information, the GEF CSO network wishes to highlight to Council that a whole of society approach requires easy access by citizens to relevant information. This principle is encoded in the Regional Agreement on Access to Information, Public Participation, and Justice in Environmental Matters in Latin America and Caribbean, the ENCASO Agreement, and the Convention on Access to Information, Public Participation in Decision-Making and Access to Justice in Environmental Matters, the Aarhus Convention. The work of GEF will be strengthened considerably by establishing supporting relations with these two conventions to increase information access by civil society organizations, indigenous peoples, community groups, and citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May I give the floor to Victoria virtually from Austria.
Thank you, William. Thank you very much for this report, which we highly welcome. We'd also like to thank the GEF Secretariat for reaching out and coordinating with the different initiatives and frameworks in such a proactive manner. We have a couple of comments on the chapter on UNCCD. So first of all, we appreciate the involvement by the GEF Secretariat in the fourth meeting of the IWG on drought in Samarkand last November. And we're very grateful that the GEF Secretariat continues to closely follow this work. And we hope that this will also contribute to the discussions for the next replenishment negotiations, where we would like to see more financial resources allocated to drought management. And we also think that strengthening the existing financial mechanism for drought is the best way forward and can help to avoid a further fragmentation of the global financial architecture. We also have a comment on the CRIC 21 of UNCCD, where we noted with concern that the timely delivery of GEF support to eligible countries' parties was a challenge in the last reporting cycle. So we appreciate the efforts by the GEF Secretariat to increase the effectiveness of enabling activities to better support the 2026 reporting campaign, and also welcome the commitment that the funding for eligible countries will be made available as early as 2 years in advance of the reporting cycle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victoria. Lara Bermúdez, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, William. En primer lugar, agradecemos a todas las convenciones por estar presentes y compartir sus ideas sobre cómo estructurar las sinergias entre las convenciones. Consideramos importante apuntar a un trabajo sinérgico que facilite una implementación eficiente y efectiva del Marco Mundial de Biodiversidad CUNMIN Montreal, pero también de los otros marcos y las otras metas de las diferentes convenciones, de las cuales el GEF es un mecanismo financiero. Debemos identificar oportunidades para impulsar y coordinar un enfoque colaborativo, inclusivo, de carácter intersectorial y multiactor en la implementación de todos los marcos, respetando, por supuesto, los tiempos y los mandatos de cada una de las convenciones y los acuerdos multilaterales. Los nexos entre la Convención de Biodiversidad, Desertificación, Cambio Climático, Químicos, Minamata es innegable. En este contexto, desde Colombia queremos darles la bienvenida a la COP16 del Convenio de Biodiversidad, que se celebrará en octubre de este año y que tendrá como lema la paz con la naturaleza, Peace with Nature, pensando en una gobernanza inclusiva que reconoce la bioculturalidad, impulsando el desarrollo de una bioeconomía para el buen vivir, fomentando el diálogo de saberes y conocimientos sobre biodiversidad y acción climática, y hacia un camino de procesos transformacionales para enfrentar esta triple crisis. En la COP16 en Colombia tendremos la oportunidad de mostrar al mundo, desde todos los países, los esfuerzos para reflejar la ambición que tenemos en el marco global de biodiversidad. Y esa ambición se reflejará en los compromisos concretos que cada uno de los países pondrá en sus planes nacionales de acción de biodiversidad, pero sobre todo en los esfuerzos en la implementación urgente en línea con la responsabilidad y la ambición en el cumplimiento de los compromisos. Como lo ha mencionado el secretario del Convenio de Biodiversidad, tanto el GEF 7 como el GEF 8 han contribuido sustancialmente al cumplimiento de las metas. Sin embargo, el reto aún sigue siendo enorme y por eso otros mecanismos que permitan canalizar los recursos de todas las fuentes son definitivamente fundamentales. Y esta semana tendremos la oportunidad y el reto enorme de aprobar las reglas del Fondo del Marco Global de Biodiversidad, incluyendo fórmulas innovadoras en la gobernanza de un mecanismo financiero como es el Auxiliary Body, que permitirá complementar esa gobernanza y enfocarnos para aportar el cumplimiento de las metas, pensando no solamente en unos actores, sino con el enfoque de todo el gobierno y toda la sociedad, para la cual secundamos también el llamado que varios han realizado a los donantes de aportar y de contribuir de manera importante a este fondo con el fin de cumplir con los objetivos previstos. La COP en Colombia será la oportunidad para dialogar entre todos los actores y en especial para movilizar a los pueblos indígenas, las comunidades locales, las mujeres y los jóvenes hacia la implementación de las metas del marco como un compromiso conjunto. Finalmente, quisiéramos resaltar la reunión que se ha mencionado en Brasil para discutir los impactos del mercurio en los pueblos indígenas. En relación con el convenio de Minamata, agradecemos que la Secretaría Ejecutiva tomó la decisión de ampliar la participación de los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales, propuesto por nuestra región con el copatrocinio de Australia y Canadá. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Laura. Alf, you have the floor.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you to the Secretariat and to the conventions for preparing and presenting a very comprehensive report about the relationship of the GEF to the work of the conventions for the time period 1st of April to 30th of November 2023. I have a few points on the UNFCCC. Many have recognized at this meeting the notable and very welcome example of the GEF joining forces with other finance instruments. For example, the joint statement offered with GCF Adaptation Fund CIFs at COP28. And we hope that we are seeing a new trend that can really enhance impact. The situation with reporting requirements for transparency on climate is often done by consultants, and this is somewhat regretful, and we worry about country ownership and capacity building. So in the document, there are many different activities which are described, but we would really appreciate if the GEF could sum up its approach to building lasting institutional capacity in the developing countries for reporting under the Paris Agreement. With regard to the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee process on plastic pollution, the INC process for a new instrument on plastic pollution is actively drawing on lessons learned from other processes. We hope that the GEF is planning specific communication efforts towards that process to help build insight on how and why plastics could more easily draw in the private sector to address common challenges. We furthermore encourage the GEF to closely follow patterns in plastic production. There is a need for awareness raising and addressing signs of plastics becoming more of a safe haven sector for greenhouse gas emissions, as GHGs are gradually being reduced in energy and mobility. Final point on the CBD. The GEF has a pivotal role to play in fulfilling the Target 19 in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. In addition to the GBFF, a benefit sharing solution on digital sequence information, which was mentioned by David Cooper, will also contribute to the fulfillment of this target, drawing on contributions from the private sector. We very much encourage the GEF to stay engaged in this process, mindful that the GEF is still a potential host for a global DSI fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Alf. Thank you also for taking yesterday's recommendation of going slower. And I encourage everybody else to please follow that example, because today has been big pressure on the interpreters, and we need to slow down a little bit if we want to be understood by those who don't speak English. Thank you. So Sam, you have the floor.
Thank you. We welcome the report and the presentations this morning. Like Alf mentioned, it's great to see the GEF Secretariat working increasingly well with the other multilateral climate and environment funds, including a joint visit to Uganda recently with the GCF and team members of the UK's Task Force on Access to Climate Finance programme. On this, we are looking forward to hearing more on GEF's plans to implement the COP28 Joint Declaration on Enhancing Access and Increasing Impact, the role of the multilateral climate funds, especially on progress to harmonise procedures, processes, policies, and development of common indicators and alignment of results frameworks. We welcome the UNCCD Secretariat's support for integrated programmes. And like Laura said, we are supportive of increasing synergies between the conventions and multilateral agreements. We support GEF engagement with the UNCCD Intergovernmental Working Group on Drought. It would be good to know how the GEF is addressing the emerging recommendations of this group in GEF 8. And like Victoria said, how we can strengthen GEF's work moving into GEF 9. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Laura, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. We would also like to thank the representatives of the conventions being here today and giving us updates on the current and coming processes. We also welcome GEF Secretariat's active participation in all these processes, and we complement the GEF's vision of seeking complementarity and synergies between conventions and with other funds. Increasing demands are being put to public funding and Secretariat resources, and tackling the challenges one by one is not an option. As the GEF now serves the GBFF and the BBNJ and is also invited to consider additional support to the new global framework on chemicals during the next replenishment, and discussions are being held in, for example, the plastic negotiations as to the role of the GEF. It is important to be mindful of GEF resources and capacities. I would also like to raise also during this agenda point our concern that the chemicals and waste focal area is lagging behind the other focal areas in GEF's funding. Also a few words specifically about the GEF's international waters activities. We as party to the Convention on the Protection and Use of Transboundary Water Resources and International Lakes appreciate the cooperation between the GEF and the Water GEF's Convention. There is a long-standing cooperation between the GEF and the UNESCO Secretariat of the Water Convention, which has been directly engaged in GEF projects. This has concretely showed the capacity and impact of joining forces on the ground. The Water Convention can be key in establishing governance structures that jointly manage surface and groundwater resources and thereby ensure impact and sustainability of GEF interventions. We would therefore think that a stronger cooperation between the GEF and the Water Convention would be extremely beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yoko, you have the floor.
Thank you, William. Japan welcomes all the reports from the secretaries of conventions and commends the GEF Secretariat's efforts to continue to follow the development of each one of them. As we all know that the CBD COP16 is happening in October, as announced, we expect extensive discussions on the resource mobilization, including the operationalization of the GBFF. We would like to remind that the GEF Council meeting decisions and the discussions do not prejudge the discussion of the CBD COP and the relevant meetings taking place in this year. As for the plastic ink, there will be the fourth session of negotiation in coming April. We would like to ask the GEF Secretariat to follow closely, as the GEF can be one of the financial mechanisms for this new instrument and plays a key role to engage the private sector in this regard. Also, we appreciate that the analysis has begun on harmonizing the policies and processes between the GEF and GCF. We hope both organizations cooperate to ease the access of finance for recipient countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rob, you have the floor.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you, Monica and David and Rolf and Andrea for your presentations and for taking time to be here with us today. I always find this part of the meeting to be incredibly important and incredibly informative. It's along with the STAP presentation, it's one of my favorite parts of the meeting. We get to hear the important work that all of the conventions are doing and be reminded that the GEF is the main source of funding for a lot of the work that these conventions are doing, and really the main source of funding for the recipient countries. And so I think it's good to be reminded that we are the financial mechanism for so much of this work, and it's really important work. Now I'm gonna just ask a few questions and highlight a few things from the various presentations. I'm gonna start with the UN CCD. We found the guidance regarding making funding for the UN CCD reporting available 2 years in advance to be really helpful. And I just am wondering what steps is the GEF taking to help make funding available sooner? Is this approach going to be applied to other reporting enabling activities? So that's for the UN CCD. I'm going to move on to the UNFCCC. We are pleased to see, as others have said, the efforts by the GEF Secretary to increase awareness of the support available from the GEF to assist countries in preparation of their BTRs. How many countries have taken advantage of this expedited modality? We're just interested to find that out. And again, as others have said, we also have heard support from the UNFCCC colleagues about the linkages between the UNFCCC financial mechanism and the UNFCCC technology mechanism. We would be interested in learning more about how the GEF is connecting with the technology mechanism. We are pleased to see continued efforts, as others have said, by the GEF to coordinate and harmonize with other climate funds like the Adaptation Fund, the GCF, and the CIFs. We would be interested to learn more about the gender climate nexus and what best practices you have identified among the funds. With respect to chemicals and waste, as I think everybody knows, during the GEF 8 replenishment, we strongly supported an increase in funding for the chemicals and waste focal area. It is our understanding that many countries have not yet taken advantage of the funding allocated. And I think we've heard that that focal area is lagging behind. So we're interested in how the GEF is increasing awareness of this funding. What sort of outreach are the MEAs doing to the parties? I think a really good example of this is at the BRS COP in 2023, in May of 2023, there was a strong call from recipient countries for funding for PCBs, for PCB work. And then we heard from the GEF that there's actually quite a bit of funding set aside for PCB work, but that the recipient countries hadn't been asking for it. And so I'm just interested in hearing any progress on how that's going, and if there is sort of now a correction of that misalignment where there's actually is funding available, but it hasn't been a priority for countries to ask for it. So just really interested in hearing more about that. I'm also really appreciate Monica's remarks about the integrated programs and their so far lack of update on Minamata issues and outcomes. And I just want to, we are big supporters of integrated programs, but I think hearing about how the integrated programs are helping also countries achieve their commitments in the MEAs is really important. And I thought Monica's comment about Minamata was an important one. I would be interested in hearing what your thoughts are on how we can sort of make the integrated programs relevant to the commitments that that countries have in their MEAs. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think that ends the list of speakers. So back to you, Monica. Dave, do you want to answer?
Right, thank you so much for all the questions related to Minamata Convention. Other questions, I believe there will be also GEF colleagues following up on those questions here and beyond the meeting. And I appreciate that Colombia, for your constituencies, you referred to the initiative by GRULAC countries, Australia and Canada, to put forward the proposal indigenous people decision. And I think as far as specific questions are concerned, there was a question from about the integrated programs. And I think this will be an important exercise to understand how that could be improved and why so far there has been a little mercury action basically incorporated in those integrated programs. We have had already some discussions with GEF Secretariat about it, and just because we know that the level of programming for integrated programs have been mostly used, there is just one more about sustainable cities. So really our eye is on the GEF 9 and how to really make sure that it goes better for Minamata Convention. I would say that there are some specific connections that could be integrated into the bigger integrated programs. So without going into details here, but Amazon and Congo and forest biomes is the one where the connection is very clear, and also sustainable cities take into account how, for example, cement production leads to huge amounts of emissions of CO2, but as well as mercury. So there are some low-hanging fruit that by fitting in Minamata Convention to these bigger ideas, we can also serve Minamata Convention. But let me stop for now, and thank you so much again for your questions.
Thank you. I didn't catch any specific questions for the Convention on Biological Diversity, but really just to thank all the council members and observers for their comments. I think very important comments made about the need to make sure that we fully realize these synergies, noting limited resources, but also I think noting the opportunities they provide. And I think, given the breadth of the actions required under the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, with targets, for instance, on pollution, targets to contribute to the climate agenda, targets to look at the restoration of degraded lands, among others. It is clear that we need to work in an integrated way going forward. And that also, I think, underlines the importance of the point made by Faisal about the continued engagement of civil society, of indigenous peoples and local communities, of business, of other sectors in all of the conventions going forward. And thanks again for the opportunity to have this exchange, and thanks for your support to the Global Biodiversity Framework.
Thank you very much. Let me offer the floor to Rolf.
Thank you very much. Just like to thank for all the comments that were shared with us this afternoon, and I'm very encouraged, especially with the comments on looking at the interlinkages of mutually supportive action among all the MEAs, and also the role of the GEF in supporting those actions. And here I'd like to thank Rob for his very specific remark with regards to PCBs. Indeed, we have been working together with a number of member states or parties to the Stockholm Convention who have actually large stocks of PCBs with the aim of maximizing the limited amount of resources versus, eliminating the maximum amount of PCBs we have. And of course, we have smaller projects such as the Jeff Islands project, which is looking at also PCBs and other chemicals in the islands, and that project is already ongoing. But in terms of trying to maximize the use of the resources, we have to undertake verification on the ground to ensure that those PCBs are in the state in which they can be transported and then sent for destruction in a proper facility. So behind the scenes, a lot of work is going, and I'm sure you will see very soon, requests for access to the GF chemicals and waste focal area for addressing of PCBs. In view of time, I won't go into any further detail, but I'm very happy, Rob, to provide you with much more detailed information on the work that we are doing to support efforts of countries to address the issue of PCBs. And once again, echoing my thanks to the GEF, to the council members for really working hard in the last replenishment to really increase the contributions to chemicals and waste, and we will not let you down. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rolf. Andrea, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's just to echo as well for all the work that the GEF is doing and the members of the GEF Council. We're all in this working together, I think, and it's really promising as well to hear the support on drought resilience issues. We are hearing from the countries, this is a real need. We need to invest in this agenda. So it was very encouraging to hear the support from different countries, Austria, UK, and different members. So looking forward to continue working on that agenda. And to Rob, I think that you were mentioning this guidance on the reporting process. I think that the countries are looking to ways to enhance the way that we are working with them in the reporting cycle. And yes, the guidance were positive. We're very open to continue exploring ways, right, to support the countries in this effort. At the end, the reporting process is generating critical information. We're hearing about the 1.5 million hectares that we need to be restored and others. I think that we are open to continue exploring ways to work with the parties in enhancing the reporting cycle. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Mr. Koche.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. And I think I would like to inform this august body that this document to inform the council that document GEF's C/C6605 will not be introduced, and the floor is open for comment. Can you assist, Mr. Secretary?
Mr. Co-Chair, we don't see any observation coming from the floor. Yes, please, Chief.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Co-Chair, as well as council members. Good afternoon. Wanted to take this opportunity to quickly respond to some of the questions that have been raised on the report, not necessarily in any order of specificity. So there were questions related to the reporting, as well as the capacity support we're providing particularly on the CCC front and the transparency support. And just to highlight, there is a separate, every council, there is a separate information document on that provides a progress on the capacity building on initiative for transparency. We also provided, as part of the our COP report, which got circulated to council before submission, a tabulated information on all the support providing that's being provided for the biennial transparency report, what modality, how many countries, and how they are progressing in terms of the preparation. I'm happy to circulate that information to you because that will provide you with some very concrete information on what we're doing. And the CBIT report also highlights the kinds of support the countries are requesting to build capacity and what types of systemic assistance that the CBIT is providing to a great number of countries that have already taken advantage of this particular support for the transparency reporting. And the GEF support started from 2016 in preparation for the first submission of the BTRs to be expected by the December 31st of this particular year. There were also some questions related to the provision of support from the 2-year upfront support for the UNCCD. I think it would be good to also highlight for every single one of the reporting obligations as well as enabling activities under the conventions, we do actually make efforts to provide support as early as possible. And in the case of capacity, not capacity, but transparency, the support provision started in 2019. So there are ways that we're making sure that the early upfront, front-loaded support can be made accessible. And I can also provide you with the figures on which countries took advantage of the expedited modality, as well as which countries took advantage of the bundling of multiple reports under one. Okay, and thank you for the comments related to us following issues related to the plastics INC negotiations. We have been following this very closely. We have been present in all the INC so far, and we do plan to be present at the upcoming INC 4, which will take place in Canada in April. And thank you for the questions as to what we're doing on the communication efforts. We do have quite a bit of information that we have actually been providing on items related to the IP. There is an IP related to plastics. And we also have some information related to how we're engaged with the private sector in this particular area. On questions related to PCVs, I think Rolf came in and explained that we are working very closely with his secretariat, and we do hope that we will have some strong programming coming through around the event within this year, if not one after. And in terms of raising awareness of focal points of Minamata and Stockholm, they are invited to the constituency workshops we have. There's one coming up in I think the Caribbean as well as in Africa. And we will really continue to make efforts to engage with all the focal points of the conventions that we serve. And now that we do have the BBNJ, once that goes into entry into force, as well as some more assignments at the country level, we will also redouble our efforts to ensure that the country is aware of the support opportunities that we will have within the GEF 8 period and also beyond. Thank you also for comments, I think from Victoria and a few others on the importance of the drought agenda. Just to highlight what we have been doing is that coming out of the last COP, we also got very clear signals on really articulating our support to the drought agenda. In the GEF 8 programming strategy for land degradation, there's already a very strong entry points to support the drought agenda. We are also doing an internal analysis, and I think my colleague Ulrich mentioned this yesterday. We are doing an analysis internally of different focal areas, in particular land degradation, but also for the LDCF and SCCF, on projects and programs that would have implications as well as support for the drought agenda. And we're compiling this information so that we will have more updated GEF-wide assessment as well as insight into what the GEF has been doing in terms of addressing this particular growing agenda of growing importance. And that hopefully can help inform the further deliberations as well as be of some use for the GEF-9 replenishment negotiations. And Laura, as well as others, mentioned the very important COP16 that's coming up just around the corner. And we are very much looking forward to engage and be as supportive as possible. And obviously, we will have from tomorrow more discussions related to the GBFF as well as governance and how the introduction of some of the measures to really make the access to resources quicker through the project cycle as well as resource allocation models. And we really hope that these will be the good news as well as good momentum going into the preparation process as well as the actual COP. And thank you also for the encouragement for us to follow the discussions on DSI. We will continue to do so and do our best in that particular front. And there were some questions, I think, maybe from a couple of council members on what we're doing in terms of the multilateral climate funds. I think the UK asked that question as well as others. So throughout the reporting period of this particular the progress report, we have actually had quite a number of interactions with obviously GCF on the joint programming pilot. So as mentioned, we had a very insightful workshop in Uganda. And we're planning to see what we can do in the remaining pilot countries. And those are Jamaica, Bangladesh, as well as Fiji. So we're looking into opportunities to really capitalize on the momentum that we're building. And we're also starting to see, I would say, some results as well as reflections in the projects and PIFs that we're receiving. You will see one from Rwanda in the LDCF work program. So, I mean, we're actually quite encouraged that there is a buy-in as well as recognition of this particular work in terms of trying to work together among the funds to help countries come up with more impactful initiatives. In terms of the progress that's being made as a follow-up to the joint funds heads announcement we did at COP28, there is a working group among the funds, in addition to the ongoing efforts on specific themes. So we already have a group that's focusing on indicators and methodological framework. We also have another group that's, I would say, a carryover from the group we pulled together to have a joint pavilion at COP28. So that's kind of sort of morphed into the mechanism for us to coordinate. And one of the elements we also, I also want to highlight is that because there is the ongoing G20 work that's related to this particular issue of multilateral funds and our harmonization, all the funds have also provided the background information as well as most recent analysis on policies and procedures and harmonization. From the GEF and GCF, we just finished work on this one. So we have shared that. And other funds such as CIFs, I mean, they have their ongoing work on this particular element also at the request from their committee. So those have been sort of handed over to the G20 presidency, but at the same time, the conversation still is ongoing within the funds so that we can actually have a good work plan to deliver on the elements that we have the fund heads have actually put on the table. And one of the key elements is by the middle of this year, we would like to come back to the respective governing bodies with some way forward as to what will be the concrete work plan that we can unveil by the end of this year. So I hope that answers the questions. Back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chisuru, and for those respond. Finally, I would like to call on the council members to adopt draft decisions GEF/C66/05. So without any comment, then the draft decision is adopted. Thank you.
Okay, that's it for this morning. So enjoy your lunch and we'll see you back at 2 o'clock as close as possible. Thank you.